The fierce battle between the Demon Lord and humanity, which has been going on for a long time and has brought a huge number of victims from humanity, should finally end soon and bring great relief to people. The battle must end because a hero has appeared, chosen by the goddess, who was chosen to defeat the Demon King, who has been terrorizing them all this time. While El was fighting with the Demon Lord, his close friends, who stood aside and tried to help him in some way, called out to him and said that they were at the limit, so they urgently needed to retreat so as not to be defeated. The girl with short hair shouted at him and desperately asked him not to die for anything, even though they themselves would have to retreat. The young man turned over his shoulder at the voice of his friends and shouted to them that the rest of the battle would remain on him, so they needed to hurry up and leave. After informing her friend of her departure, the girl spread her arms and used a teleportation spell. After that, El turned to the Demon King and said that now he needed to end this once and for all. When the Demon Lord rushed at him, El begged the goddess to lend him her protection. After the battle, El opened his eyes and saw only darkness in front of him. He cursed and used a light spell. After that, he looked around and saw a whole mountain of skeletons, which made the young man scream in fright. After seeing the skeletons, El assumed that he was underground, which is why it was so dark here. He thought that it would be nice for him to get out of there before he died alive without air. Raising his hand, he used a teleportation spell that illuminated that dungeon for a moment, and then transported Akel to another place. Once outside, the Akel landed neatly on the ground. Looking around, he saw that absolutely everything in this place had been destroyed because of his battle with the Demon Lord. El raised his hand to then grab the helmet from his armor and take it off his head. Then he put the helmet on the ground under his feet. Straightening up, El turned his head to mess up his hair. The young man stared at one point and said that he had finally defeated the Demon Lord and saved humanity from destruction. He decided that he needed to pay tribute to the goddess for the protection he had asked her for back then. Suddenly, the sword that El had been holding in his hand glowed brightly. The young man lowered his head in surprise and asked what was going on. The light coming from the sword became even brighter and swirled in a vortex. This vortex expanded, completely surrounded Ale, and then rose up. From this vortex, a very beautiful woman appeared, who shone brightly and hovered in the air, peacefully closing her eyes. It was a goddess. El looked up at the goddess, who had decided to come to him. She looked down at him and smiled gently. She turned to the main character, calling him by his full name, Noel, and said that she was very glad that the young man was still alive. The goddess said that her powers did not extend to the lands of the Demon Lord, so while Noel was unconscious, being under the rubble, she could not even guess whether he managed to survive or not. She began to go down to Noel and suddenly said that the young man had been fainting for 6 months, so she was very worried about him. Because of the goddess's words that he had been unconscious for 6 months, Elkanan opened his eyes in a daze. He started when the realization came to him that a lot of things could have happened during this time, and exclaimed anxiously that this simply could not be. Suddenly, Noel had a flash of realization, and he remembered something. This made him even more nervous, because he remembered his comrades. The young man excitedly asked the goddess if they were okay. Lowering her head, the goddess quietly said that Al's friends were fine, but regret was written on her face. After hearing that his friends were safe, El was finally able to relax and smile. Closing his eyes, he thanked the goddess from the bottom of his heart for this, and then she suddenly stretched out her hand to his face, and Noel stared at her in surprise. She suddenly said that although Ale's friends were fine, but the same could not be said about the young man's world. The goddess's hand froze a couple of centimeters from his face, while El himself stared at the goddess, stunned, frozen in place. The goddess told that Noel's kingdom, Lavania, declared that the hero who defeated the Demon Lord in a hard battle was Prince Cain Lavania, who smilingly accepted the applause of the people, which he did not deserve. Upon hearing this news, Noel asked in surprise how the prince could have been declared the winner. The young man scratched his chin thoughtfully and said that everyone from his squad had returned, so it was very strange. Having plucked up the courage, the goddess closed her eyes and cruelly reported that Noel's friends were now pretending that Ale himself had never been at that battle, and all this by royal order. When she said that, El exclaimed in a daze. The goddess told that, forgetting about the victory that Noel had won, Akena became a magician at the court and bowed before the king. Having reported this news, the goddess continued and told that the knight Guadal also forgot about Noel and received a luxurious mansion in the capital, as well as a whole harem of beauties. Saint Stella also forgot her friend and was engaged to a false hero who deceived everyone by saying that he had defeated the ruler of demons, Cain Lavanius. Having finished reporting this news, which shocked Noel, The goddess said that it was in return for these positions respected throughout the kingdom. Raising his head, El said that "in return" sounded very strange, because these were all awards. Suddenly, he stared at the goddess in a daze, frowning in disbelief when he realized that Stella was now engaged. Lowering her head, the goddess said regretfully that this was exactly the case. In surprise, El clutched his head and wondered when Stella had managed it, because for him this news was too unexpected, because he had known the girl since childhood, when she had fun playing with him. If Noel could still somehow accept that Stella was engaged, the fact that she was engaged to Prince Cain of Leven was even stranger news for him. Then the goddess distracted Aglaé from her thoughts and offered to tell him about the reason for the imperial decree that everyone should keep silent about the identity of the real hero. Noel raised his head and began to listen attentively to all that the goddess was saying. The goddess told him that the hero who defeated the demon lord was their last hope of salvation. But if that hero died, not only the people of their kingdom, but absolutely all of humanity would be in turmoil. The goddess said that the banner of hope, in the person of the hero, existed in order to give hope to people exhausted by many years of war. When the goddess stopped telling him about it, Noel pressed his hand to his chin and frowned uncomprehendingly at the fact that he was so easily replaced. The goddess guiltily looked away and said that she understood the intentions of the emperor who issued this decree, because he wanted to keep peace in the country. After that, Elskapals tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. He abruptly straightened up and exclaimed that he was alive, so now everything could change. The goddess immediately destroyed his hopes, saying that even if Noel returned to the kingdom, the real identity of the hero would still remain a secret. When his last hope was shattered, Noel made a sound of understanding, and then lowered his head because he felt a strong mental pain, because now everything could not be the same as before. The goddess tried to calm him down, and said that the identity of the real hero was being kept secret so that the demon lord would not return, but there were also personal intentions of the king. The goddess said she didn't even think it would come to this. Lowering her head, the goddess worriedly said that there was something strange about it. The king has long been suspicious. The goddess still didn't trust him, so she was dealing with all this now. The king sat on his throne, towering over his subjects, and said with a smile that everything was just amazing, because the heroes came from his kingdom. After looking at the knight named Noel, who was on his knees, the king turned to Tom and said that he hoped that he would continue to fulfill his duties. After that, the hard way began for the sake of protecting people and their country. Remembering this, El bitterly wondered what would have happened if it hadn't been for him, and he wouldn't have defeated the demon ruler. But now everything Noel was fighting for belonged to another man who didn't deserve it. The goddess bent over the young man and pulled him out of her thoughts. Cupping his face in her hands, she asked Ale what he was going to do now. He lowered his head and said heavily that, in fact, he didn't even know what he was going to do. He then raised his head and smiled faintly, saying that he wasn't going to calm down because he wanted to live a peaceful life. To begin with, Noel returned to his home and thought about the future. At home, he packed all his belongings into a backpack, and then, puffing, he put it on his back and left his house. Finally, the goddess thanked him for saving their world from the demon lord, and wished him good luck in his future life. El came out of the forest and came to the city, where a knight greeted him at the entrance. Once in the city, El began to look around. The goddess blessed Noel for a happy life, and when he came to the city, he came to a cafe, where he ordered himself a drink and a couple of plates of food. The cafe owner asked Ale if he had come from far away. Sitting down at the table, Noel saw a poster on the wall, on which there was a congratulation of Saint Stella on pregnancy. Noel asked in surprise what it was, and he told him that it was a news report that his wife had embellished. The owner of the cafe smilingly announced that Saint Stella was pregnant, and exclaimed that this was a real miracle, for which the whole city rejoices. Noel took the news quite hard that Saint Stella was pregnant and engaged to the prince. After eating, El paid for the food and left the city, where he stayed for quite a while. Walking through the forest, El looked at the sky and sighed heavily, regretfully thinking that now he can't even congratulate Saint Stella, his ex-girlfriend, on her pregnancy, because now everyone thinks that he simply does not exist. Suddenly, an explosion occurred in the forest right in front of Noel, which caused a pillar of fire to rise tens of meters above the trees. Seeing this, El stood stunned in place, not understanding what was happening. The young man realized that this explosion was coming from a village nearby. Without thinking twice, he took off and hurried to that place, jumping from place to place in order to figure out what had happened there. Running there, Noel stopped in surprise and frowned, tightly pursing his lips, because there was a huge hydra that was growling loudly, turning its heads. Right in front of the Hydra, there was a small figure that turned out to be a woman. She put her hand out in front of her, trying to somehow stop the Hydra coming at her, but the woman was already weak and badly injured. At the same moment, the Hydra rushed at the woman, opening all its 5 mouths. The woman cowered in fright and closed her eyes, preparing for her death. But suddenly a sound was heard, and when the woman opened her eyes, she realized that she was still alive. Lifting her head, the girl realized that she was in the arms of a young man who was using magic to defend himself from the Hydra. Lowering his head, he asked the girl if she was okay. Hydra clearly did not like the fact that someone appeared who rebuffed her and did not allow her to eat the girl, so the monster growled indignantly and rushed at Noel. He did not blink an eye, after which he rushed straight at the Hydra and attacked it with his sword with lightning speed. Frowning, Noel watched as blood sprayed out in all directions from his blow. In order to fight the Hydra, he had to let go of a strange girl on the ground, so she sat on the ground during the battle with the Hydra and stared dumbfounded at the stranger who saved her at the last moment. When Hydra was defeated and lay lifeless on the ground, Noel stopped in front of this girl. She got to her feet and exclaimed admiringly that the young man had just stunningly defeated the Hydra alone. Finally, Noel spoke and drew attention to the girl's condition, and said that she looked very battered after the battle with the Hydra. Ellis asked if she was hurt. The girl pressed her hand to her chest and said with a smile that she was not injured, and that everything was fine with her thanks to him. She thanked El for single-handedly saving her from Hydra. Suddenly, the young man noticed something and opened his mouth in a daze. He found a collar on the neck of the girl he rescued, which meant that she was not free, and asked the girl if he was mistaken in his assumptions. When El drew attention to her collar, the girl pressed her lips tightly together. She lowered her head and said with pain in her voice that she was actually a warrior, that's why she was wearing this collar, which means that she has a master. The girl looked away and told that she, as a warrior, was given a task, and, to make sure that she would not escape while completing this task, they put this collar on her. Suddenly, Noel suggested that the girl just take this collar off her. At his suggestion, the girl exclaimed in amazement and asked about it again. Raising her hands, the girl wanted to object and say that this was impossible, but she did not have time to finish, as Noel put his hand in front of her and used a spell of destruction. Immediately after that, the collar fell off and just fell to the ground. The girl sat down on the ground in surprise, not understanding how it happened, and muttered that it was the strongest collar that could not be destroyed by anyone except the head. When the girl sat down, Elle noticed that, in addition to the collar, she also had a seal on her, which, just like the collar, made her an unfree person. He said that he would be able to remove this seal too. After that, the girl sat down on the ground and took off all her armor so that the seal could be seen. Noel lifted the cloth that covered the girl's neck and saw the mark underneath. He said that this mark looks pretty strong. The girl told him that the seal that was applied to her was unique, because she would not be able to remove it even if she gathered all the magicians, so she was told. Examining this seal, El thoughtfully pressed his hand to his lips. He then held his hand out in front of him and used his destruction spell again to remove the seal. The spell immediately took effect, and all the seal that was on the girl's body began to peel off. When the spell was over, the girl looked at herself in surprise, because the seal was really gone, although, according to her master, it was impossible. Looking at her hands, the girl said in a daze that she simply could not believe that now she was completely free and was no longer someone's property. Unable to stand it, the girl lowered her head and sobbed. Continuing to cry a little more, the girl looked up at Noel and smiled at him, thanking him for freeing her. She said that now she owed the young man, since he had helped her so much. Bending over the girl, Noel said that he did not know her name. The girl immediately came to her senses and said that she still did not know his name either. The girl smiled at the young man and said that her name was Sarah. El also introduced himself to her and said with a smile that his name was Noel Vega. He said he was glad to meet Sarah. Sarah was surprised that Noel was so kind to her. Continuing to sit on the ground, she said that she was also glad to meet Noel. After they met, they got ready to hit the road. Noel said that he hadn't even thought about the fact that he and Sarah needed to go in the same direction. Sarah thanked Ale for the clothes. He apologized for the fact that she had to wear his clothes. He smiled and said that he would give Sarah women's clothes when they returned to the city together. Suddenly, Sarah said that this was impossible, because now it was a ghost town. Upon hearing this news, Noel opened his eyes in a daze and asked again. After that, together with Sarah, they reached the city, which actually turned out to be a ghost town in which no one lived anymore. because almost all the buildings there were destroyed. Looking around, Sarah told me that she had heard that this city was attacked by demons. The girl said that after the demon attack, the kingdom had fenced off the entire area. They reached the ruined building, which is Noel's house. As Noel approached the door of her house, which had been destroyed by a demon attack, she told Sarah that she was his first guest in so long, so it would be nice for him to clean up here. Sarah turned to him and asked, a little surprised. Without explaining to her how he would do it, Noel raised his hands, and then used the spells of transformation and purification. Immediately, the descendants of magic appeared, who picked up the wreckage of the house and returned it to its place. Now Elle's house looked just like new because it had been completely repaired. Sarah admired this work and exclaimed that it was simply amazing. Having dealt with the appearance of his house, Noel invited Sarah there, and they sat down at the table together. After that, Elle raised his hand and asked Sarah about her mission in this village. The girl lowered her head and muttered something. Her uncertainty caused Noel's eyebrows to furrow, and he sympathetically asked her about the fact that she couldn't talk about her miss because it was still difficult for her to talk about it because of her past. Keeping her head down, Sarah said that was not the case. Finally, she plucked up the courage and said that she was thinking that she still needed to confess everything to Noel. With a slight frown, the girl said that she had come to this village to carry out the order of their king. When Sarah mentioned the king, Noel was surprised. Meanwhile, the girl continued and said that the king had said that she should erase all traces of Noel Vig's existence. Stunned, Elhana realized that she was talking about him. Darkening his face, he quietly asked Sarah why the king would erase all traces of Noel Vig's existence. The girl replied that she did not know this either, because she was not privy to it. Folding his hands on the table, Noel asked the girl that she was the combat property of the king, since it was he who entrusted her with this mission. Sarah looked at the table and replied that she was not the king's man. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth and furrowed her brows to keep from crying. She said that her owner was someone who had done a lot of good deeds during the time of the enslavement of demons, although despite this person was not very pleasant. When Noel heard that the man had done many good deeds during the time of the enslavement of demons, he was startled, because this person could be one of his former friends. The young man quietly demanded from the girl that she tell him the name of the one. Then Sarah replied to Noel that the man's name was Gouda. Hearing the name of an old friend who preferred to just forget him forever, Elle shuddered. Noticing this, Sarah asked the young man if he knew this man. Elle muttered that he really knew this man. Sarah lowered her head again and said with anger in her voice that Guadal and the hero, or rather Prince Cain, were simply disgusting towards her. They told Sarah that even if they had to completely wipe out the ghost town in order to remove Noel's tracks, it was worth it. They said there shouldn't be any difficulties with a ghost town. Despite their status, those two were terrible. Suddenly, Noel looked at the girl and firmly told her that in fact, he was the hero who saved the kingdom from the Lord of Darkness, and not the prince. When the young man said this, Sarah raised her head in a daze and asked again. The young man said that he was the one who defeated the demon lord. But despite this, the king made it look like it was Cain who defeated the demon lord, and not Noel. Then Guadal did not refute this statement, so the prince received the love of the people. Sarah stared at Noel in surprise, not knowing how to accept this news that they had been deceived all this time, and Prince Cain was not a hero. Elle noticed her confusion and thought that the girl did not believe him. Sarah closed her eyes and objected. She calmly said that now she understood everything. She realized that the king had given her an order to erase the traces of the real hero so that no one could doubt that the prince was a real hero. Moreover, the girl personally witnessed how Noel single-handedly managed to kill Hydra and save her, so Sarah was sure that the young man was very strong. Therefore, it fits the personality of the hero. She turned to the ale and wanted to say something, but did not have time, because her stomach suddenly rumbled with hunger, and the girl fell silent. She bit her lip and looked down, blushing in embarrassment. Realizing that the girl was hungry, Noel smiled and laughed. He got up from the table and said he would cook something to feed her. Sarah immediately jumped up from her seat and exclaimed that she would help him with the cooking. In order to cook something, they needed water, so Noel and Sarah went outside to the well to get water, but found that it was completely empty. Looking down, Noel said that it was very strange, because the earth goddess protects this land, so it was impossible that the well had dried up. Closing her eyes, Sarah leaned over the well and listened, but she could not hear the sound of water. This made Noel even more wary. He furrowed his brows and scratched his chin thoughtfully, thinking about what could have happened to the water. After thinking about it, he suggested that we go and check on the hacker. When they came to the place where the hacker was, they were both surprised. They found seals there that were used by demons. They contained such power that they could bind a god or a spirit, not to mention that only the demon himself could remove them. Looking at these seals carefully, Noel assumed that they were parting gifts from the demons after the attack on this city. Frowning, Sarah seriously agreed with Noel. Suddenly, the young man clenched his hand into a fist and swung, deciding to remove the seals from this well. When he did, Sarah started up and asked in surprise what he was doing. After Noel broke the seals, water splashed out of the well in all directions. Suddenly, the water swirled and formed a pillar of water that towered over the forest, and a girl jumped out of it, who joyfully exclaimed that she was back now. Delighted, the short girl landed on the edge of the Hokaru, from which Noel released her, tearing off the seals of the demons. She called Ale a hero and thanked him for saving her. The young man was very surprised when the girl recognized him as a hero. He approached the girl and asked in a daze that she knew him, since she immediately called him a hero. The girl put her hands on her hips and exclaimed that this was so, because except for the hero, no one could remove the seals, and she also felt the protection of the goddess on him. Hearing that the girl really understood that he was a real hero who defeated the ruler of demons, Noel smiled and tilted his head to the side, joyfully saying that he no longer even thought that someone would be able to see a real hero in him. The girl jumped off the edge of the Hokaru and came closer to Noel and Sarah. Standing in front of them, the girl told them that in fact she is the goddess of the earth, who was not so sleepy that she did not notice the hero because of the restriction of the seal. Sarah bowed her head in surprise, doubtfully asking if the girl they took out of Hokaru was really the goddess of the earth, because compared to them she was very small, and Noel reached only to the waist. The goddess of the earth was startled when she heard that because of her height she was not recognized, and irritably exclaimed that she was not as small as they say. Suddenly she felt something and craned her neck. Confirming her fears, the earth goddess shuddered in shock and furrowed her brows. At the same moment she jumped back, pointing a startled finger at Sarah, who stepped back, raising her hands. The goddess screamed that Sarah was a demon. Noel wrapped his arms around the girl so that she would not kick, and with a soft smile tried to calm the frightened girl, saying that everything was fine, and in fact Sarah was a good demon. The goddess looked up at him and asked in surprise. When the goddess finally calmed down and stopped being so afraid of Sarah, Noel put her on the ground. Sarah came up to them and looked thoughtfully at Ale. After being silent for a while, she asked if it was true that he knew from the very beginning that she was a demon. Sarah was very surprised that even though Noel knew she was a demon, he still saved her from the Hydra and freed her from the stigma. Elle explained to her with a smile that she was in danger, that's why he saved him, because it doesn't matter to him who she is, a human or a demon. Sarah lowered her head and smiled when Elle said that. The earth goddess jumped up and said that everything was fine, since Sarah was a good demon, and then she offered to introduce herself to them, calling herself Aqua. Aqua said she was the goddess of the land of their friendly and awesome neighborhood. After Aqua introduced herself, Noel and Sarah smiled and introduced themselves too. Suddenly, at the most inopportune moment, Aqua's stomach rumbled with hunger, and the girl clutched her stomach. The goddess was not at all embarrassed, and, raising her head, bluntly stated that she was very hungry. When the girl said this, Noel laughed, closing his eyes, and said that, as it turns out, even gods can actually be hungry. Noel exclaimed and suggested they cook something together. She looked at Aqua, who was much shorter than him, and asked if she could summon water. Aqua immediately agreed. Then she filled the bucket with water using algae. When they finally had water, they were able to cook a meal, for which they did all this work. After a while, several plates filled with fresh food appeared on the table. Noel hoped they would like it. After sitting down at the table, Sarah apologized to Noel with regret because she couldn't help him. Besides hunting, but because of that, she had an idea how to use a knife. Elle introduced it and told Sarah not to worry. Aqua picked up the greens that were in the plate with her food with a fork and asked if it was a weed. Noel turned to the goddess and said that it was not a weed, and wild grass, which is edible. Aqua realized that it wasn't really a weed. After tasting the food that Noel had prepared for them, Sarah opened her eyes with pleasure and exclaimed joyfully that the food turned out to be very tasty. After looking at Sarah's reaction, Aqua gave a skeptical verdict that demons do not understand food at all, since they eat some kind of edible grass. Plucking up the courage, Aqua abruptly put this green in her mouth, closing her eyes. After tasting the food, Aqua suddenly opened her eyes and exclaimed admiringly that it was just amazing, even though it was an ordinary herb. The goddess immediately pounced on the plate of food, asking how the herb could be so delicious. Sarah asked Ale if his cooking was a hero's ability. The young man looked up from his meal and told her that it was not his magic or ability. After a while, everyone ate their portions. Aqua exclaimed with satisfaction that she was full, although some time ago she did not believe that grass could be delicious. After finishing, Sarah turned to Noel and thanked him with a smile for the meal. After the meal, Noel told the well-fed girls gathered at the table that he thought a lot about everything when he calmed down after the news about the betrayal of friends. He thought about the shabby buildings and empty streets of the village. Feeling the mental pain, Noel turned away and said that the entire village where he met Sarah in the first place was blocked off after the attack of demons on her. When Noel crossed his arms over his chest, Sarah informed him that she had heard that the inhabitants of this village had left somewhere, because they could no longer live here after the demons destroyed everything. After eating, Aqua stretched lazily and said that she was very glad that people were safe now that they had gone to another place. But despite all this, Aqua still hoped that someday the residents would come back. Noel turned to Aqua, who was still hoping that after moving to another place, the residents would still return here to their native home. The young man cut off the goddess's hopes and said that this was unlikely after the move. Aqua drooped and sighed. Continuing to sigh heavily, Aqua lifted her head from the table and sadly said that she, as the goddess of the earth, was very lonely without the people who lived here. The goddess said that this was the reason Noel couldn't say that people wouldn't come back here. El got up from his seat and soothingly patted the drooping goddess, who was left without people, on the head. She indignantly pushed his hand away and asked perplexedly what he was doing. Noel smiled and looked down at the girl, saying that he had returned here, to his hometown, which was also the birthplace of Aqua. The young man said that, after returning, he would always live in this place. Aqua looked in surprise at Noel, who was standing next to her, and asked if he would really live an ordinary village life despite the fact that he was the hero who saved this kingdom. Because the people should love him, not the prince. Noel smiled and crossed his arms over his chest, saying that this quiet life would not be quite ordinary, because he was someone who was able to work for 100 people, so he would be able to work alone, but the result would be like from a whole crowd of people. He waved his hands and said with a smile that it would be very cool if they could revive the village to the state it was before. El asked Aqua, who was looking at him in surprise, if she agreed with his words. After hearing his suggestion, Sarah immediately raised her hand and exclaimed that she would also help them rebuild the village. Noel leaned over Aqua, who was still sitting on the chair, and said with a smile that he would look forward to it. The earth goddess stopped being so sad and exclaimed with a smile that Noel could rely on her to help rebuild the village, because she was still the friendly earth goddess of this district. After that, they went outside to begin rebuilding the abandoned village. Noel said that first they need to do something with these fields. Aqua understood him and waved her hands, intending to plant vegetables here. She abruptly raised her arms above her, which caused a whole wave of water to appear over her head, which was needed to revive this dead soil so that they could then plant vegetables in this barren place. Scratching his head, Noel wanted to say that they needed to sow the vegetables first, but he didn't have time to finish, because he let out an admiring sigh when Aqua was able to summon water without difficulty. The water poured onto the dry ground and completely soaked it. Immediately after that, the goddess of the earth clenched her hand into a fist and abruptly raised it above her head, joyfully exclaiming that vegetables were sprouting one after another right in front of her eyes, in this now fresh land. Putting his hand on his side, Noel smiled and told Aqua that the seedlings did not grow as fast as the girl wanted. At his words, Aqua also put her hands on her hips and giggled. The goddess of the earth pointed to a small green sprout that suddenly appeared in the soil, which a minute ago could not bear fruit in any way. The girl asked Noel what it was if the seedlings didn't grow so fast. Noel bent over this small sprout in surprise and breathed out in surprise that the seedlings were already sprouting. Sarah also bent over the sprout and exclaimed that Aqua was just lovely. Aqua proudly told them not to be shy about adoring her so much. She suddenly declared that all this was done not only by her forces, but also by the forces of other gods of the earth who help her, because absolutely everyone wanted to help the hero. Noel said he understood that, but despite that, he was just a former hero. Aqua smiled and bowed her head. She said it didn't matter at all whether he was a former hero or a current one. The earth gods didn't care because they all wanted to help Noel. Pointing at herself, Aqua exclaimed that she was no exception among others, and also wanted to help the hero. Elle smiled at her and sincerely thanked her for her help. After the plants were finished, Aqua looked at Noelle and Sarah and exclaimed that now they would make the village the way it was before the demons attacked it. Noelle smiled and agreed with her, saying that they would make this village a better place. Aqua agreed, and then immediately offered to pick weeds for them for breakfast. Elle indignantly exclaimed that these were not weeds, but wild grass. Some time later, Noelle was walking through the forest and found a lone goat there. He did not miss this chance, and attached a collar with a leash to the goat. Picking up the reins, Elle went on, and the goat did not object in any way and obediently followed right behind him. The young man said that he did not even think that he would be able to find a goat in this forest, which, in his opinion, was just wonderful. Aqua was in the forest with Noelle. After he found a goat, Aqua also started looking for goats in this place. She pointed behind the bushes and exclaimed that there was a goat there too. The earth goddess wiped the hungry drool from her lips with her hand, joyfully exclaiming that with 2 goats they would have their own fresh milk every day that they could drink. Noelle went where Aqua pointed him, thinking that he would find another goat there. But after passing through the bushes, they stopped in surprise on the spot because it was not a goat at all, but an unconscious blonde girl lying on the ground. The young man immediately rushed to her aid and sat down on the ground next to the girl. He called out to her, trying to bring her to herself, and asked if she was okay. After receiving no response from the unknown girl, Elle stretched out his hand and used a spell to heal all the injuries of this girl. But it didn't really help him because the girl never woke up, which made Noelle frown. Since the healing spell did not help him bring the girl to herself, Noelle heaved a sigh of frustration and took the girl in his arms, deciding to carry her to his home to help this girl and cure her. Arriving at his home, Noelle put the girl on the bed and covered her with a blanket, while he sat on a chair near the bed and cleaned his sword. After a while, this girl slowly opened her eyes and found herself in someone's house. She immediately sat up in bed and turned to Noelle, asking where she was now. The young man turned away from his sword and turned to the girl, asking that she had woken up. Aqua popped into the room, who was glad to see her wake up. Then Aqua quickly ran to get a glass and filled it with clean water using her powers. An unknown girl took a sip of this water from a glass and muttered in surprise that this water was very tasty. When the girl drank some water, Noelle turned to her and clarified the whole situation. He said that the girl had not opened her eyes all this time, so he thought she was sick and brought her to his house. After the young man mentioned the girl's condition, she lowered her head and said that a lot had happened to her, so her condition was like this. The girl said that she was vacationing in a village that was not far from this one. She hadn't opened a window in her house for a long time, and when she did, the air was very clean. For some reason, the girl was very fascinated by the beauty of nature, and therefore went for a walk in the forest, and then tripped over a root and fell, hitting her head. That's why she lost consciousness. After the story, the girl muttered that she hadn't eaten or drunk for a long time, so she was very hungry now. Noelle replied that he understood her and offered to cook something for this girl. Then Noelle stared thoughtfully at his sword and suggested that after he removed the demonic seals from Aqua and freed her, it could have affected the atmosphere and made it much cleaner, which is why that girl went outside. Aqua put her hand to her chin and said that the water had recently gushed into the dead soil and revived it after a long time. This could play a role in the fact that the atmosphere in this place had changed so dramatically. After they found out everything, the blonde girl put her hand to her chest and introduced herself as Sonia. She smiled and sincerely thanked Noelle for not passing by and saving her. To prepare food, they decided to milk a goat that Noelle had recently brought home. While Aqua milked the goat with a smile, Sonia stood next to her and held a milk bottle box in her hands. At the same time, Noelle and Sarah stood aside. Watching Sonia help Aqua milk the goat, Noelle said that, in his opinion, Sonia is a good girl, because she immediately found a common language with Aqua. Sarah, who was standing next to Noelle, looked down and quietly agreed with his words. Hearing Sarah say this with sadness, Noelle turned to her and asked the girl what had happened to her. Sarah told him that she was worried about Guadal, her former tyrant master. If she doesn't come back, then Guadal might send someone else to look for her, and that could put this village, as well as her new friends, in danger. Noelle grabbed Sarah's forearm reassuringly and said that they would figure something out anyway, so that Guadal wouldn't send someone to look for her, so Sarah didn't have to worry yet. At that time, Sonia came up to him and offered him milk. Sarah drank a whole glass of milk and said that it was very tasty, and Noelle watched the girl with a smile, because the milk managed to distract her from bad thoughts about her former master. who treated her cruelly. Suddenly, a cheerful and active Aqua jumped up to Sanya, as always, who told the girl to hurry up, because the goddess of the earth was going to arrange a race with her all the way to the river. Noelle turned to Aqua and told her not to force Sanya to run distilleries with her, because she had not fully recovered yet, and it might be hard for her. Aqua did not listen to him and hugged Sanya, protesting. In response to Noelle's words, Sanya lowered her head and said that despite the fact that they think she is recovering, her mental wounds still remain in her. At the same moment when Sanya told about her mental wounds, Aqua, who was standing next to her, started up and asked if Sanya could talk about it with her. Sanya turned around and looked at her in surprise. Suddenly the girl looked down. Tears appeared in her eyes, which Sanya tried to hold back by biting her lip. The girl sobbed and trembled when Aqua was so worried about her. Sanya lowered her head even more, and her arms hung limply. With a heartache in her voice, the girl told that her fiancé broke off their engagement. Aqua looked at her in surprise and grabbed her hand reassuringly. When Aqua did this, Sanya could no longer hold back and sobbed. She said that absolutely the whole capital was talking about the breakup of her engagement with her fiancé, so she could no longer tolerate it. Covering her face with her hands, Sanya trembled and said that she had escaped from the capital. Aqua patted her hand and asked her not to cry. Sarah exclaimed that there was nothing worse than this guy, and Elle exclaimed that the guy was blind. Somehow calming down, Sanya clasped her hands together and announced that, most likely, her new friends knew the one who was her fiancé. The girl told that her fiancé was a hero who defeated the Demon Lord. Noelle, Sarah, and Aqua stared at the girl speechlessly after she told them that her fiancé was the hero himself. Suddenly, Aqua elbowed Elle in the side and laughingly told Tom not to make such an expression when he heard the news. The Earth Goddess said that Noelle himself knows that this does not look convincing at all. Calming down a little from the shock, Noelle turned to Sanya and asked if Prince Cain was her former fiancé. The girl immediately replied that it was indeed Prince Cain. She said that the prince got engaged to the saint he was with when he defeated the Demon Lord 6 months ago. Satania couldn't stand it and cried, saying that the prince was expecting a baby. Sanya covered her face with her hands and sobbed that she did not even have time to hold the groom's hand. Aqua began to calm her down again. Sarah exclaimed that Cain was definitely the enemy of women, and Sanya was not to blame for this. Elle exclaimed that she was very sweet. After Noelle called Sanya cute, Aqua and Sarah silently froze in place, staring at the young man. He immediately came to his senses and awkwardly cleared his throat, putting his hand to his face to look serious. Noelle turned to Sanya and said that of all people, it was her ex-fiancé, who was now engaged to Saint Stella, who was a lying hero. Sanya calmed down and looked at Noelle questioningly, putting her hand to her chin. Noelle replied to her that that was exactly what the story said. After listening to Elle's words, Sanya realized that Prince Cain, her former fiancé, was not really a hero. Aqua exclaimed that Noelle was the real hero. Sanya asked her, stunned. The young man started talking about how it was all very difficult to explain, so it would be okay if Sanya didn't believe them right away. The girl immediately refuted his words and said that the Earth Goddess was talking about it, so she couldn't help but believe her. The girl looked around. She saw 2 goats grazing peacefully in a field. Then Sanya said that this village was very beautiful and asked if she could stay here. She said that the real hero Noelle does not boast of his merits and lives a quiet life. Sanya put her hands to her chest and bowed her head, saying that she was very touched by Ailey's kindness. He crossed his arms over his chest and said seriously that he had returned to his native place, but it was important for him whether Sanya herself would be able to make this decision to stay here. The young man asked if her family would worry about her while she was gone. While Aqua hugged her, Sanya said that she didn't know anything about whether her family would worry about her, because she was going to live in an abandoned place far from home, but she was going to ask their permission. When Sanya said that she would ask her parents, Noelle stopped being so serious and smiled. He said that they would be happy to welcome Sanya to their village. She smiled happily and agreed. After a while, Sarah shouted that everything was ready and went into the room. Now the girl was wearing a new suit. She smiled sheepishly and asked Aqua if she liked this costume. Aqua, who was standing right in front of her, examined the costume and exclaimed that it looked very cool. This confused Sarah even more, and she stammered and asked if it was true. Sanya, sitting on the floor, laughed and covered her mouth with her hand, saying that Sarah was a woman, so she always deserved to look good. Sarah smiled and clasped her hands together, after which she thanked Sanya. Noelle leaned over to Sanya and said that they couldn't even think that she had such a talent. She was sitting on the floor among the fabrics and threads. She said that embroidery is considered good form for women, which is why she learned to sew so beautifully. Sonia smiled and said that she would try to help absolutely everyone in their quiet village, which they were still going to rebuild after the demon attack so that the residents could return back here. Noel put his hands on his hips and said with a smile that Sonia looked much better now compared to how exhausted she looked when Elle found her. When he said this, the girl started up. She smiled sincerely and agreed with him. A man was standing next to the body of the Hydra defeated by Noel when he rescued Sarah from her clutches. The man froze in place and looked at the Hydra. He was stunned and did not understand who could have done such a thing to a terrible monster. This afternoon, Noel was working in the field while everyone else was at home. The young man diligently plowed the ground with a hoe so that they could then plant plants here, which they could then eat together. While he was working, the man in armor who had recently discovered a Hydra in the forest came up to him from behind. He said that the village was empty, but began to develop again. Hearing his voice, Noel was distracted from his work and turned around. He stood in front of the man and immediately recognized him. It was his friend, Gerzus. Recognizing his old acquaintance, Noel, in the young man, Gerzus roused himself and, stunned, asked him what he was doing in this abandoned place. After that, Noel brought him to his house, and Gerzus told him that he had come to this place because he was looking for the missing daughter of the commander of the Knight's Order. Elle asked about the commander's daughter, and Gerzus was stunned to see Sonia at the table. He immediately jumped up to her, because he immediately realized that it was actually Sonia. She turned to him and exhaled in surprise. She exclaimed that she and Gerzus had not seen each other for a very long time. He asked in surprise that Sonia had been in this village all this time. He exclaimed indignantly that the entire mansion was in chaos after her disappearance. Sonia drooped and muttered that she knew everything, and that she was very sorry for that. Noel walked over to Sonia, who was sitting at the table, and put his hands on his hips. He said that he still thought that the girl's family had a fairly high position in society, because she was the prince's bride, and now it turns out that she herself is the commander's daughter. Sonia did not deny this, and said that in fact Gerzus was not lying to them, and she was the daughter of the commander, whose name was Gushir Almaty. Aqua curiously put her finger to her lips and asked if the rank of commander was important. Noel turned to her and explained that this was so because the commander was the most important in the army. Gerzus smiled at Sonia. Raising his hand, he told her that all her relatives were very worried about her because they did not even know where she was or what had happened to her. Gerzus suggested that Sonia return home together. In response to his suggestion, Sonia put her hand to her cheek and guiltily said that she did not want to return home at all, despite the fact that she was expected. She wanted to stay here and help here. Gerzus asked, stunned. The knight, still not understanding what was happening, jumped up to Noel and demanded an answer from him. Noel calmly replied to Gerzus and said that he and Sonia had already discussed this, and they decided that first she needed at least family permission to stay here. Gerzus slapped his forehead with the palm of his hand and, sighing, said that he understood everything. Just at that moment, the door suddenly opened, and Sarah entered the house, who loudly announced from the threshold that she had returned home. Noel turned his attention from Gerzus to her and greeted the girl. He said with a smile that he had noticed that Sarah looked very pleased to be back home. She proudly exclaimed that she had caught a big catch today. Gerzus, who was watching this, pursed his lips tightly and stared at Sarah. When Noel and Gerzus went outside together, Elle said that he still fondly remembers when they went on adventures together. The young man turned to the knight and asked if he was in the army. Gerzus replied that it was so. He bowed his head and closed his eyes, after which he seriously said that his new boss had given him an important task, and therefore he had come here to complete that task. Gerzus turned to Noel and told her that he had heard that Sonia had been seen in a village nearby, but when he came to get Sonia, he was greeted with a commotion. The maids were very nervous and shouted at him that Sonia was not here. Noel lowered his head and said with a smile that, despite his important task, which was assigned to him by his new boss, Gerzus first worried about Sonia. The young man said that it was very similar to Gerzus, whom he had known for a long time. Gerzus frowned and asked Noel if he thought that he himself had changed because he was so carefully protecting a lost girl whom he hardly knew. The knight said that Elle protects not only one Sonia, but also a demon girl. Noel was instantly wary when Gerzus started talking about the demon, because he was definitely talking about Sarah. The knight lowered his head and said that this was a very indecisive job, but despite this, he had his own goal. At these words, the knight slowly began to draw his sword from its scabbard. Noel was stunned by how abruptly Gerzus' behavior changed, and he suddenly began to pull out his sword. The young man asked an old acquaintance in surprise about what was the matter. Gersus said seriously that Sarah was a demon who had been assigned an important task. The knight asked why Sarah was living with Noel despite the fact that she had a task. Albert said that she was living with him because of the circumstances. Gersus abruptly thrust his sword in front of him and pointed it at Noel, who was standing in front of him. The knight said that his real goal was to make sure the girl was working, and the situation could get worse depending on Noel's response. Noel said seriously that he knew about Sarah's real purpose, which was to destroy all signs that he had ever existed, and it was because she herself obeyed someone else's will that he protected her. Gersus did not care at all about the words of his former friend, so he continued to point his sword at Noel. The knight said that his boss was on the team with the hero who killed the demon lord. He was the one who instantly became the best of the best. Gersus continued and said that his new boss was so strong that he could well claim the place of commander-in-chief of the knightly order. Noel looked down tensely and thought about what Gersus was saying about Guadala. Gripping the hilt of his sword harder, Gersus said that since his master was very strong, if his task was not completed, then the situation could become too deplorable for all of them, because his master would not just leave it like that. Noel looked seriously at the knight, for whom duty was much more important than their friendship, and firmly said that he was ready for the fact that the owner would be very angry. Gersus froze in surprise, with his sword held out in front of him, because he did not expect at all that Noel was going to go against himself and his master's will for Sarah's sake. He asked if El would stand his ground if there was an entire army against him. Noel was not at all afraid of the prospect that he would have to fight an entire army to save Sarah, so he replied to Gersus that he was ready to do it. At the same moment, the knight planted his feet more firmly on the ground to attack. Noel furrowed his brows, preparing for the fact that he would have to fight Gersus, who was stubbornly striving to fulfill his knightly duties. Seeing that Noel was not going to give in to him at all, even despite all the threats and danger to his life, Gersus froze in place, with his sword held out in front of him. Finally, he calmed down and sighed heavily, lowering his head. He scratched the back of his head and lowered his sword, ceasing to be so tense. Gersus calmly said that he understood why Noel was willing to do all this to save Sarah. Gersus muttered that Noel had done a strange thing by supporting the demon girl. The knight asked if El knew that Sarah was not a free person but only someone else's weapon. El replied that he had already removed the collar from Sarah. Upon hearing about this, the knight asked Ali about it in a daze. He asked if Noel could really take off such a collar. El calmly replied to him that it was because he was a hero. After that, Gersus was even more stunned. For a conversation, Noel brought him to his house. There, Gersus was finally able to relax enough to take off his knight's armor. El put Sarah's collar on the table, and Gersus cursed, because he was convinced that El was really a hero. Noel pushed back his chair from the table, on which lay the collar he had recently removed from Sarah. While Gersus was examining the collar in surprise, with his hands on the table, Noel asked him if the knight now believed him, having personally seen the evidence. Gersus took the collar in his hands and said seriously that he knew one thing for sure. The person who took off this collar definitely could not be a simple citizen. Noel replied that, despite everything, he was now an ordinary villager, not the hero he was. The knight looked up from the collar and looked at Noel. He agreed with the young man's words that he was now an ordinary villager, and not the hero he had once been, but then asked what a real hero was doing here at all. To listen to Noel's whole story about how he and his friends actually defeated the demon lord, but then they betrayed him and proclaimed Prince Cain a hero, Gersus sat down at the table. While Noel was telling him about it, Gersus was drinking something from a mug, and when the story ended, he was very angry. The knight slammed the mug hard on the table so that the liquid splashed, and cursed loudly. He tensely brought his hand to his face and lowered his head, saying that he had already assumed that entrusting the destruction of an already destroyed village to a demon girl was strange, but he did not even think that such a secret was hidden behind it. After Gersus calmed down a little, Noel, who had been sitting opposite him all this time, turned to the knight and calmly said that he would like to ask him for a favor. Gersus looked up at him and agreed to listen to Al's request. After they had a serious conversation, and Gersus found out the truth, which the king had very carefully hidden from them, Noel went outside to talk to Sarah. There he told the girl that Sonia was returning to the mansion. Standing next to Sarah in surprise, Noel replied that this was actually the case. Sonia will have to come back to explain to everyone the whole situation about the fake hero in short. Sarah asked about who would accompany Sonia on her way home. Noel explained to the demoness that Sonia would be accompanied back home by Gersus, who had been his old friend since the time when Noel himself was still a researcher. Elle reported that Gerzis had already come here to find Sanya. After Noel explained the whole situation to Sarah, he suddenly turned to the girl again and offered to help her deal with the prey she had brought from the hunt. Sarah was delighted to help him and thanked him. Suddenly, a small hand grabbed Noel's sleeve, not allowing him to move from his place. It was Aqua, who was very unhappy that Sanya would have to go back. The goddess frowned and asked Noel when Sanya would return to them. The young man turned around and looked down at the earth goddess, whose appearance immediately made it clear that she was unhappy with Sanya's departure, and replied that Sanya would return as soon as she received the commander's permission. It might take time. Aqua asked Noel if he would go with Sanya Gerzis, and Noel told her that he would not. Meanwhile, Sarah dragged in another deer carcass. Noel looked the other way and said with a smile that Gerzis had another task. Some time later, when it was already night outside, Gerzis was already at home with his new owner, who assigned him the task of finding out what had happened to Sarah. He said that this study had already been mentioned before. Gerzis came to his master and, without batting an eye, lied to him that the fighting demon girl he was assigned to find was severely injured in the battle with the Hydra and died because of it. Woodall, who was sitting impressively on the sofa and drinking wine from a glass, sighed with displeasure and muttered that the demoness was useless. Woodall said that he had been told that she was one of the best in the army of the Demon Lord. With his hand on his side, Gerzis explained to Woodall that it was very difficult to get into the area where Sarah died because of the Hydra that killed her. The knight put down the collar that Sarah was wearing and put it on the table, saying that despite the Hydra, he was able to find it, although in fact this collar was removed from the demoness Noel. Gerzis said that finding the collar was the best thing he could do. After Gerzis deceived his master at Noel's request, he asked Goodall for permission to let him leave, because he had already reported the results of his mission to him. When Gerzis finally left, Goodall remained sitting silently in that room. He frowned in displeasure and sipped the wine from the glass, continuously looking at the collar on the table. Goodall thought about how he had failed to completely remove all traces of Noel. He lowered his head and grinned, thinking that despite the fact that there were still traces of Noel's existence, there was a Hydra living in that place, so no one would definitely go into that village. Thinking about it, Guanol laughed madly. That same day, Sarah asked Noel about what he had done with the collar that had recently taken her off. Noel said that he then asked Gerzis for advice, and he offered to use the collar as proof that Sarah really died. Noel told Sarah with a smile that after Gerzis showed her collar to Gwendal, he would definitely not look for her anymore, because he would think that she was actually dead, so now Sarah is free. The girl looked down and smiled. Sarah raised her head and with a smile sincerely thanked Noel for helping her again. The girl also said that she was very grateful to Gerzis for helping her. Sarah said again she expresses her gratitude to both of them. At the same time, Aqua already missed Sanya, her new friend, very much and asked her to come back to her faster. Noel looked at the goddess and assumed that Sanya was going to bake a pie. Sarah looked around and agreed. On the first night, when Noel returned to his native village, he and Sarah looked at Aqua with displeasure as she sprawled on the bed. Sarah was surprised at the strange position Aqua was sleeping in, and Elle muttered that there was no place at all. Noel howled in frustration that the whole bed was occupied by Aqua, and therefore he had nowhere to sleep at all. But there was nothing to do, so he decided to accept that there would not be enough beds in his house for all three of them. Elle said he could sleep on the floor. He picked up his pillow, intending to go to another room, and told Sarah that she could sleep in his bed if she wanted, and he could sleep on the bed, and he also had folding beds where you can also sleep. Sarah immediately woke up when she heard that Noel was going to give her his bed, and he decided to sleep in the living room in not very comfortable sleeping conditions. The girl exclaimed that it would not do at all. Sarah grabbed Noel's pillow with her hands, not allowing him to go into another room, and exclaimed that Noel was the owner of this house, so he did not have to give them his bed. The girl said that she would sleep in the living room instead of him. Noel was surprised by her persistence and decided to give up. He scratched his head awkwardly and said that if Sarah didn't mind, then they could sleep together on his bed, and then no one would have to sleep in the living room. Then Sarah was glad that none of them would have to sleep in the living room, and, without hesitation, exclaimed enthusiastically that she did not mind at all that the two of them slept together in the same bed. But when they both went to bed, Sarah immediately regretted her impulsive decision, because while Noel was sleeping peacefully with his back to her, the girl was very embarrassed that she was not sleeping alone and could not sleep all night. The next morning, when they both woke up, Noel sat up in his bed and told Sarah that she looked tired. He asked the girl if she had slept well. She replied that she had almost slept enough and also that she always looked tired. The day after Sanya left them at home to tell everyone the truth about the hero, someone's indignant exclamation was heard on the street. It was Aqua, who was very unhappy that their oven wasn't working. Noel, who was standing next to the earth goddess, replied that it was so. He said that the oven looks quite intact from the outside, but it works from magic, and there was nothing inside the oven. Elle said that it was actually very convenient. After looking at the magic oven once more, Noel said that it was impossible to fix these magic parts that were broken so easily. This upset Aqua even more, and she asked if they could definitely not be repaired. Elle tilted his head to the side and doubtfully muttered that he could try to fix these parts, but he could not give an exact answer about whether he would be able to fix everything. Aqua immediately became inspired and began to persistently beg the young man to fix the magical parts anyway, so that the oven would finally work. Noel realized that it was so easy for him not to get rid of Aqua and, sighing heavily, agreed. Just at that moment, Gersus appeared right behind them, who had returned from the task that Noel had assigned him. He asked about what Ale and Aqua were doing at this magical oven. Noel smiled at his friend, who returned to them, and gratefully said that Gersus had helped him a lot by convincing Gudal that Sarah was dead. Gersus said that there was nothing to thank him for, because Noel had asked him to do it, being his friend. After that, the two friends sat down at a table with 2 glasses of water on it. Gersus spoke again and asked if Noel remembered the girl who betrayed him and then became a court magician after defeating the demon lord. Noel immediately became serious and replied that he still remembers that girl, Akena, who actually helped him in the battle with the demon lord, and not Prince Cain. After making sure that El Shai remembers Akena, Gersus said that Akena was locked up. The young man was very surprised that someone had managed to lock up Aina, who, as he remembered, had always been very proud, so he would hardly have allowed her to be locked up so easily. At the same time, Sanya was walking across the field, making her way through the tall grass that was moving in the wind. Sanya reached the cemetery, which had been empty for a long time, and saw a girl standing there with her back to her and silently looking at the grave. Sanya was holding a whole basket of flowers in her hands. She greeted the girl and asked if she knew anyone from the village. The girl replied that she did not know, but that was how her old friend lived, who died while performing a dangerous task. Sanya immediately realized that the grave where this girl had recently stood belonged to her old friend, who had died. Sanya smiled awkwardly and straightened her hair, inviting that girl to come visit her. Sanya said she could make them tea and they could chat together because she was also new to this abandoned village. The girl did not refuse, and eventually Sanya brought her to the house where Noel and the others lived. Opening the door, she loudly informed all the residents that she had finally returned. The stranger stood behind her and looked at her curiously. At that moment, Noel was standing next to Aqua, who was immediately glad that her friend had come. When he heard that Sanya had returned from a mission, he turned around to greet her, but stopped because he recognized Aina in a strange girl. Asena also recognized Noel immediately and froze in place, stunned. Sanya was as surprised as the two of them, so she abruptly turned to Noel and stared at him questioningly, not understanding how he knew Asena. Aina's legs and arms trembled violently when she realized that her old friend had not died. The girl dropped a bouquet of flowers on the floor, which she had been holding in her hands a couple of seconds ago. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes as she put a trembling hand to her lips. Iva muttered that Noel had indeed been alive all this time. Suddenly, Aina fell to her knees, resting her hands on the floor under her. Lowering her head, she guiltily exclaimed that she was very sorry that she had betrayed him, forgetting about her friend at the will of the king, and then accepting the post of court magician. Noel was too embarrassed that his old girlfriend was falling to her knees like that. The young man looked away and covered his face with his hand. He asked Aina to raise her head and look at him. When the girl obediently raised her head and looked at him, Noel bent over her and asked if she had done all this because of that Prince Cain, who was a false hero. All this time, Aqua stood next to the young man and listened to their conversation. Aina clenched her hands into fists in despair and told them that the king had convinced them that it was necessary to forget the real hero and make the prince a hero so that they could preserve the hopes of the inhabitants of the kingdom. Aqua was very outraged when she saw the girl who had once betrayed Noel. The goddess also bent over the girl sitting on the floor and exclaimed that in return, Aina received the status of a court magician. Hearing about this, Aina hesitated awkwardly. Noel, who was standing behind the outraged Aqua, put his hand on her head and told the goddess not to tease Aina, because it was not at all surprising that she became a court magician, because she used to work very well in the squad. Tears welled up in Aina's eyes again, and she looked down, saying that even in the squad, it was Noel's forces that worked for the most part. Aina exclaimed that El had actually defeated the demon lord, not her and their other friends. After the girl calmed down a little, Noel went to the table and pulled out a chair, inviting Aina to sit down so that she would tell him everything later. He asked about what happened to the girl, because she wasn't like that at all before. Sitting down at the table, Noel folded his arms and said that Aina used to be very self-confident. The young man said that she was so brazen that she forced him to cook food. Aina also sat down at the table and lowered her head, without answering anything. Noel put his hand to his forehead and asked about why Aina had returned to prison. He said that a court magician should be a mentor, not a prisoner, and asked if he was speaking correctly. Aina started up in amazement. The girl jumped up from her seat and asked, stunned, how Noel knew that she was imprisoned again. Suddenly, the girl abruptly sat down on a chair again and drooped, lowering her head. She mumbled in frustration that, with her outstanding abilities, she thought she would be able to master the work of a court magician, but failed. On the day when the girl was appointed court magician, she was told that now that she is a mentor, she can no longer use combat magic. Aina was greatly stunned by this. The magician girl, who explained to her the principle of her future work, explained that after the death of the demon lord, everyday magic was becoming more popular, so they tirelessly trained it for people. The mage girl smiled at Aina from under her hood and asked if she could handle it, because she was very used to her combat magic, which would now be impossible to use. Then Aina looked at the girl in surprise. After telling Noel about this, she lowered her head even more and said that she was absolutely useless, and El watched her with a surprised expression on his face. Looking down, Aina muttered that for the sake of enslavement, she had been training and studying her combat magic hard, which made her completely forget about everyday magic, which she now had to use, since combat magic is prohibited. Everyday magic was required from court magicians, which Aina was not used to at all, so she stayed in the house and studied. For example, the court magicians needed to repair the church. Everyone took this assignment with ease, but Aina couldn't. The girl diligently practiced her daily magic, but from time to time she absolutely failed. Once again, having ruined everything, Aina realized that she had no abilities for this magic. She could only use combat magic. Noel calmly listened to the story of his girlfriend, who repented of his betrayal, and, understanding everything, he said that it was for this reason that Aina escaped from the palace. In confirmation of his words, the girl hunched her shoulders more and remained silent. Suddenly she raised her head, gathering her resolve, and angrily said that, besides that reason, there was another reason why she had run away from the castle, leaving her position. Aina said she definitely had to tell Ale that. The girl raised her head and looked directly at Noel, after which she told him that the plan of the false hero Prince Cain to take the place of the real one had been thought out from the very beginning. Noel tensely asked Aina what she meant. Then Aina told Noel the cruel truth that after enslaving the demon lord, the hero who saved them was planned to be killed immediately so that Prince Cain would take his place. At least that's what was originally planned. Noel was stunned by the news that he had been planned to be killed from the very beginning, even though it was he who saved everyone, and not Prince Cain. The young man stared at Aina in silence, his eyes wide open. The girl said that she thinks that all this was planned in order to make the prince a hero, thereby making him a favorite of the people and strengthening his power over everyone. Noel asked if Aina had known all this from the very beginning. Aina guiltily lowered her gaze and said that she herself had only found out about it quite recently, after everything had happened. This was information that only the court magicians, including Aina herself, possessed. The girl said that a confidential document was hidden there, which could only be read by a few who held the appropriate position for this. She was a court magician, so she managed to read this document. After Aina told him the whole truth, Noel thoughtfully lowered his gaze and put his hand to his chin, frowning intensely. He asked if the idea of returning to the capital would be too careless. With tears in her eyes, Aina looked at him and said that she had come here to apologize to Noel for betraying him so cruelly in order to take a high position at court, even though she later left there. Aina honestly said that before she found out about the king's plan to kill Noel after defeating the demon lord, she did everything only for herself, because she knew absolutely nothing about him, the real hero who was deceived by the king. The girl looked down and said that it was because she knew nothing about what had happened to Noel that she decided to come here, to his native village, and make a grave there, to which she would then bring flowers. Aina hunched even more, almost hitting her forehead on the table, and said that she needed to express her much greater gratitude to Noel for all that he had done to her. After that, the girl apologized to him, saying that she was very sorry. After their conversation, Noel led Aina to one of the many abandoned and destroyed houses in this village. After examining the house from the side, Eva was surprised at the deplorable condition of this house. The young man stood next to her and, waving his hand, said seriously that if Ina wanted to atone to him for betraying him, despite all that they had gone through together, then she needed to restore all these ruins in this village. Abina was stunned that she would have to rebuild all the houses. She wanted to object because she only knows how to use combat magic. But Noel did not let the surprised girl finish. He silently raised his hand and used a restoration spell, which he also used to fix his house. As soon as he did, the house began to rebuild, becoming exactly the same as it was before the attack of the demons. Ina looked at the completely repaired house, which was just like new, and thought that it was just amazing, because even among the court magicians, not everyone was capable of such a thing. The girl wanted to tell Elle that she couldn't do it. Noel, who stood behind her with his hands on his hips, calmly said that he would teach Adina everything that was needed to return home. The girl was distracted from looking at the house and turned around, asking in surprise. The young man smiled at her and said that while she was restoring all these houses in the village, she could stay and live in his house, because he would not mind at all, because they were old friends, especially since many people already live in his house. The fact that Noel was still kind to her brought tears to Amina's eyes, and then they poured down her cheeks. The girl covered her face with her hands and sincerely thanked Noel for giving her temporary shelter, despite all the insults. Suddenly, the goddess of the earth ran up to them. She called out to Noel and grabbed the edge of his jacket in displeasure, so that the young man would distract himself from Aina and turn his attention to her. Aqua urgently reminded Noel that in addition to the houses, they still need to fix something else, which Noel had completely forgotten about. The young man immediately turned his attention to Aqua and agreed with her, and then told Ina to help him. After a while, Ina helped them fix the parts from the oven, and then Sonia and Aqua made cookies. Sonia said that everything was well done. Sarah came into the house, who asked from the doorway about the smell he had smelled. Sonia turned to the goddess of the earth and asked her to call Noel and the others home so that they could come to the tea party and also try these cookies cooked in a restored oven. Aqua immediately happily agreed. In the middle of the forest, there are two people who are facing each other, armed with swords to fight each other. The young guy sheathes his sword, but the man, on the contrary, breaks away and runs to him, which makes the guy surprised. The man makes a sword strike at the guy, but he manages to get his sword out again and successfully deflect the blow. He looks at the guy with a serious face and suggests that he check his determination. The man raises his sword in order to hit the guy again. He is determined to fight with all his might. The girl behind, who noticed their fight, realizes that this man is her father. She is going to go and stop them, but one guy grabs her hand, not letting her leave, asks her to wait. The girl asks Gurzas why her father and Noel are fighting. In front of them, the man and Noel continue their fight. The girl's question confuses Gurzas. He thinks what to answer her, and then says that something led to this. There are two tethered horses in front of the house. There are several people sitting at the table. The man who fights with Noel sincerely thanks him for saving his daughter. Noel says that you shouldn't thank him, because he didn't do anything special. Moreover, she helps in the village. The man becomes serious and asks again about her help in the village. He asks if he makes Sajanya work. Noel agrees with him and says that they lacked workers, and she helped them out a lot. Sanya's father gets angry and asks the main character if he wants to say that she stayed only to use her. Perplexed, Noel tells him that she asked him to stay. After that, the man slaps the table with his palm. He gets up from the table, holds onto his sword, and offers Noel some relaxation, reminding him to take his sword. Gurzas looks at the man in surprise and addresses him as the commander. The man tells Noel that if he has something to say, then let him do it using a sword, according to the rules of the knightly order. Sanya's father and the main character continue their battle in the forest. The man is preparing for the next attack. He says that he understood everything, because everything is as Gurzas said. The man raises his sword in front of him and tells Noel to use his skill now, orders him to strike the first blow with the sword granted by His Majesty. The main character is silent and puts his sword forward. The man wants to say what will happen if it really is such a sword, but does not have time, because the next moment Noel runs to him. The guy hits the opponent's sword, causing it to shatter into fragments, and the guy flies past and stops behind the stunned man. Noel turns to the man and apologizes to him, telling him that he made every effort to hit. There are two mugs on the table. The table is also filled with different dishes. Sanya's father says that he could not have imagined that someone who could slay him with a sword would end up in a half-empty village. All three of them are sitting at the table again. The man says that Noel is so good with a sword, he will have admirers in every country. He asks him why then. He lives in such a wilderness. The main character awkwardly tells them that a lot of things have happened and it looks like he found what he wants to do right here. The man holds a fork with food and says that this is a waste of time. If he had been a little more prudent, he would have initiated Noel into the order of knighthood. He tastes the food. The main character looks at him and thanks him for such words. Suddenly, the man's face becomes surprised. He looks at all the food on the table and admires it, asking if all these vegetables are grown in this village. The man remembers the girl who holds the flag in front of the knights, as well as the girl who helps the wounded. He thinks that the freshness of food spreads over the tongue and stimulates the appetite, and the nourishing sweetness gives strength to wounded soldiers. He reports with a satisfied face that it tastes better than anything they eat in the capital. Now the main reason to visit this village is incredibly delicious food. His daughter approaches the man with a tray. She says that the water is also good, and they are grateful to the goddess of the earth Aqua for it. The man looks at the pie that his daughter brought and asks what it is. Sanya answers him that it is a meat pie that she made herself and really wanted her father to try it. The girl cuts a pie, and her father is surprised that she made this pie herself. Sanya answers him that she learned a long time ago because her mother and the maids taught her. She remembers how she was taught to cook. She tells him that she wanted him to try it on his birthday. Sanya remembers sitting alone at the table. She says her father never came home these days, so she never got to show it to him. Gurzas turns to Sanya with a serious face and tells her that, as the head of the army, the commander went through many hardships in order to protect their country. The girl looks at him and says that she knows, because she has not been a child for a long time. Someone is reaching for a plate with a cut piece of pie on it. Gurzas says his job is sometimes even more important than his family. The girl tells the main character that all this is important. Her father's job is to protect the country, protect its future, therefore, this is also important. The girl addresses the main character by name. Sanya's father tastes a small piece of meat pie that his daughter made and says that it is amazing. He had already eaten half a piece. The man apologizes to his daughter for making her feel lonely. The man looks at his daughter and says that now he intends to stay with his family. He asks Sanya if she will still make meat pies for him. Sanya looks at her father in surprise. Gurzas is also surprised and asks him again if he wants to stay. The man gives a positive answer. The man remembers a long-haired guy in armor. He says that he was ordered to give his powers to Guidal, but he is still not sure about him. He sighs and says that he tried to delay this moment. However, it seems that the time has already come. Noel says the name Goodall. Gurzas jumps up from the table and tells the commander that if he commands the army, their country will come to an end. He knows, because he has already worked for him. The man looks at him and tells him that he also has a strong feeling that he is not the one who should protect the country, but he cannot go against the king's order, simply because it seems so to him. Noel is watching their conversation. There are several wooden barrels. Sania's father starts to say something. Noel asks if that guy is that disgusting. Gurzas says that Noel is a real hero. He says that this is obvious, because the way he controls words with a sword is the style of the knightly order. Sanya's father says he did not ask him to be so eloquent as to ruin the word given to his family heirloom. Noel apologizes for that. The man becomes serious and says that if this is true, then he cannot entrust his duties to Guadal. There are various items on the shelves. The girl with pointed ears asks Sanya if Noel has finished talking to his father. Sanya gives a positive answer and tells the girl that it looks like her father finally approved of him. She looks at this girl, who remains calm, and asks her if she was worried about it. The girl looks at her questioningly. Sanya reports that Noel and her father were fighting in earnest. She remembers her father, who stood in front of an army of knights. Her father is so talented that he rose to the top only because of his ability to wield a sword. Even if Noel is a hero, he could get hurt. The girl laughs after Sanya's words. She looks at her in surprise. She recalls a monster with several heads, saying that even to touch the Hydra, the knight's order needed 2 detachments. She looks at Sanya with a smile and asks her if she thinks that there is such a person who can seriously hurt someone who single-handedly defeated Hydra. There are plants growing in the field. Someone says that this field is very luxurious. The commander and the main character are sitting in front of the field. The man says that it is difficult for him to believe that recently this village was empty. Noel says it's thanks to a joint effort. The commander asks Noel with a serious face, "Did the others also decide to stay in the village just because he is here?" The guy with the calm face says that he just wanted to make the village peaceful, so that everyone could live here. There are 3 girls standing. One of them drinks something, saying it's delicious. The other two girls are standing in front of the goats. A girl with pointed ears holds a rabbit in front of her with a sigh. Gurza stands in front of her and is surprised at how big the hair is. The main character turns to the commander and with a smile informs him that even if they have lost their home, they can always come here anyway. The commander says that he thought it was a waste of strength for a hero like Noel to use them on a small village. Sanya's father looks seriously at the main character and confesses to him that he is only jealous of his ambitions. Noel and the commander are standing in the middle of the fields. The man tells the main character that in this case, in order to protect his youthful dreams, he also needs to stretch his bones a little. There is a beautiful building in the open air. Sanya informs her father that he can return home at any time, and if he wants to eat a pie, then let him come to their village. The commander stands in front of his daughter and asks her if she can make a pie at home. The girl replies to her father that she still has people to whom she wants to give it a try. The man turns to the main character. The man shakes Noel's hand and asks him to take care of his daughter. The guy agrees with him. The commander is standing on the street next to the horses. He tells Gursus that Noel has good intentions. Gursus agrees with him. Following the departure of Gursus and the commander on horseback, several girls are watching along with the main character. Noel says that he has never seen such a reliable person. One girl says that she got a lot of big game today. Sanya smiles and informs that it is not only for Sarah, but also for Aqua and Noel. She also made clothes. The main character holds the clothes in his hands and thanks Sanya. The girl standing next to me asks if she can try it on. Sanya says that of course, but she has to show herself to her later. After changing clothes, the girl goes to the bathroom. The embarrassed girl looks down at herself and tells her that in her opinion, there are not enough clothes here. The girl lifts the hem and says that the underwear is generally like a ribbon. The girl standing in front of her is embarrassed and tells her not to pick it up. Amazed, Sanya tells Aqua that the clothes suit her very well. The girl standing next to her understands what Sanya's clothing preferences are. She also thought it was just a ribbon or a rope. Someone approaches them and apologizes. The main character enters the room in a very revealing costume and asks Sanya if it's not just a ribbon. Everyone looks at the guy in surprise. The girl takes him out of the room, ordering him to change his clothes, because he is forbidden to wear such things, that it is a shame and all in the same style. Aqua says Sanya was going to wear it anyway, asks if it fits well. A room with windows and a beautiful ornament has a bedside table on which a tall lamp is located. The girl brings the guy a mug of tea and bows to him, calling him Prince Kane. Kane smiles, takes the cup and thanks the girl. Several houses can be seen in the shiny window. The prince says that the mansion in which they will live is almost completed. The girl asks with a smile if this is true, and then says that she is very glad. The prince drinks tea and tells her that her smile can make anyone hurry up and that her fresh black tea is the best. Suddenly, a long-haired guy boldly enters the room. He swears and calls someone a weirdo. Prince Kane asks the guy with a smile about what happened to him, because he looks annoyed. An angry Guadal informs the prince that the commander has postponed the transfer of his powers again. Guandal looks at Kane and says that he ignores the king's order and deliberately delays. He asks Kane if he is doing this because he is the father of her ex-fiancé. Prince Kane looks at the angry Guandal in surprise and asks him why, because this is not the case. Guandal asks Kane to simply refuse him in this case. Kane looks at him in frustration and asks not to escalate, because the commander is respected and loved by all subordinates. If they hurry, the knights will resist. Guadal approaches the prince and asks him if he cannot be suppressed by order of the king and how he can get him out of the way. The girl turns to Guadal and angrily orders him to stop blaming Prince Kane. The disgruntled guy looks at the girl and tells her that, then let her tell him what to do. The girl asks Kane if Commander Gusher is related to the knightly order. Kane quotes the commander's words that the order is like a family to him, saying that he usually speaks like that in public. The girl says that this is a very amazing statement. The girl thinks about it and says that, however, it is more important that when it comes to family, he has a lonely daughter and if you choose between Sanya and the order. Kane looks at the girl questioningly. She smiles and wonders if he can continue to hold his post if he has to choose between his daughter and the order. There is a slope in front of the fields, where trees grow in places. There is a group of masked men standing on it, one of whom takes it off a little. He says that if someone interferes, then let them kill everyone, orders them to go. People agree with him. The guy runs forward, holding his hand ready next to the sword. Suddenly he notices something. He grabs a sword and looks away, asking who is there. Gurza suddenly comes out from behind a tree. Holding his head, he asks if this is not his position. The main guy in the mask looks at him and says that he is alone, so let his people finish him off already. When he doesn't hear an answer, he turns back in disbelief. All his people are lying on the ground, not getting up. The guy looks at them in shock, not understanding how this could happen. Suddenly, flashes of electricity appear around him, from which he begins to fall screaming and drops his sword. In front of him stands a girl in gloves, with a serious face, raising both hands and pointing one forward, from which sparks emanate. Gurzas looks at her and says that this is what was expected of a member of the team to capture the Demon King. The girl reports that she was lenient this time and tried not to kill him. Someone approaches them and informs them that everything is clear. Gurzas looks at Sarah in surprise and asks her if she killed them all. The girl is holding several people in her arms. She reports that this is the work of Noel, because she did not have the opportunity to fight. Unsurprised, the guy reports that this is quite a Noel style. He asks Sarah where he is now. Sarah says that the pen is for goats and now it's time to feed them. She continues to carry the bodies and orders Gurzas to stop hanging around and help her already. It's dark outside. A small fountain is located in the middle of the trees. The main character says that thanks to the aqua he was able to overcome them. Thanks the girl. The girl laughs and stands proud of herself. She asks the guy what he thinks who blessed this village. She sighs, and standing in front of the guy tells him that this is all because she really dislikes bad intentions. This is to be expected from her. Even a god could not say that, although she is already a goddess. Sonia looks at Aqua with a smile, whose nose has lengthened, and tells her that thanks to her, they will be able to remember them. Gurzas and Sonia stand in front of people with their hands tied and look at them. The main character tells them that it wouldn't be bad if their leader told them everything himself, but it won't be easy. Gurzas, with a calm face, asks to leave it to him. The gang leader lying on the ground suddenly starts screaming. Gurzas sits down next to him. The guy asks him how he managed to get back. Gurzas asks him to tell him what his task is in the village. The guy looks at him silently, not going to answer. He defiantly slaps his fist on his palm and asks the guy if he chooses to remain silent, saying that in this case he will have to resort to tougher methods. The girl with the spark smiles and offers to help Gurzas, saying that they will see how many lightning strikes this guy can withstand. The guy raises his head and looks at the girl in surprise and asks Ina why she is here. She looks at this guy questioningly. It is clear that she does not recognize him and asks him who he is. The guy beamed all over and says that he was so honored that Akena herself asked him for his name. He says that born into an elite family, she provided great help to the heroes of the squad, did not brag about her achievements. Her noble will proves that she is cool. The girl blushes, and Gurzas asks if she is not an ordinary introvert. The guy continues to lie down and look at her. Isena puts her hands on her hips. The guy says that they are imprisoned in this village. The girl repeats the question of who he is, asks if he will tell her why he is imprisoned here. He decides to admit that they were here for the sake of the commander's daughter. Suddenly, everyone turns to Sonia. Sonia asks in surprise if it's for her sake, and asks why. She says she's here of her own free will. Trees grow around the rock. It's night outside. The guy says it's all because the girl was brainwashed. Sonia sits on her knees next to the guy and tells him that she has received her father's permission. The guy asks her again. The main character, who had been silently watching everything before, says that he would like to listen to them, but it seems that they do not understand each other. In the house, lights are on in almost all windows under the night sky. There are a couple of mugs of water on the table. Someone offers to discuss everything. The guy who was tied up before begins to talk about the task they received, that is, to save Sasanya. He tells her that she was brainwashed and her heart was broken. They need to take her to a place where she can forget it. They found out about her location from the nearest village. He is sitting in front of two girls and eating something. Noel sits in front of the guy and asks him whether to take away their target. But why would anyone give such an order? Sitting on a chair, the guy replies that he does not know this. Gurzas approaches Noel and asks him what they should do. Perhaps reinforcements are coming. At least we need to find out who is behind all this. The main character looks at Gurzas with a calm face and tells him not to worry about it so much. Noel smiles and says that whoever it is, they can try at least 100 times. If they dare to harm someone here, they will pay dearly for it. The girls look at the guy with a smile, and Gurzas tells him that he seems to be the only one who believes in this, so we need to find a more effective way. Suddenly, all the people in the room are looking at one point. Two people enter the room, one of whom offers to get rid of the root cause of their problems. This is the hero's business. A tall guy with glasses stands next to a short girl and offers to eliminate the root cause, that is, eliminate the hero. Noel looks at them and asks why they are doing this. The girl tells him that they are not bad people. They came from far away. She asks if it is possible to have tea first. The main character looks at them in surprise. The girl puts a few sugar cubes in her tea. She apologizes for the suddenness of their visit. Sonia, standing next to her, watches the girl and smiles. The girl puts more sugar and thanks for the tea. Sanya is surprised at how much sugar she puts in. The girl looks at her and admits that everything is fine because she loves sweets. A guy with glasses sits in front of the main character and smiles, saying that it's always like that because she has a sweet tooth. Gerza stands in front of the guests and clasps his hands and asks them a question about who they are. The guy apologizes to them. He smiles and confesses that he is the third prince of the kingdom of Schweier, and his name is Schweier. Gerza is surprised and asks if Schweier is not the closest kingdom to them. He asks them why His Majesty needed to come here. Schwartz says that he is here to get to know Noel personally. He looks at the main character and says that he wants to meet the real hero who defeated the Demon King. Noel looks at him calmly and asks Schwartz what he means. Schwartz raises his palm and says that this is a long story, and first you should tell the background of this attack. He's talking about people in masks. There are 2 barrels under the wooden beams. The main character keeps his head in disbelief and realizes that everything is leading to Guadal again. Schwartz says briefly that Commander Garsh is retiring, the problem has been solved, and what Goodall wants is the title of commander. Gerza stands in front of him and says that if this is the reason, then the army will be in disarray. He asks about the purpose of Schwartz's proposal, whether it is to deplete the strength of their army. Schwartz denies this, admitting that he definitely did not have such intentions, and asks them to believe. Schwartz stands in front of the king. Judging by his reputation as the king's right-hand man, rightfully considered the most nimble and cunning courtier, for a man like him to come to the village just to see Noel is strange. Gerza says that doesn't sound very convincing. His face becomes serious, and he asks Schwartz what he really wants. Schwartz looks at him without emotion. The girl with a smile stirs the tea and informs that it is normal to have some suspicions. But the prince is actually not such an evil person as they think. Schwartz exhales with a calm face and tells the main character that he is glad to meet him. He admires the operation to subdue the Demon King. It is a great honor to meet the hero. He should be sung with a hymn, but his merits have been forgotten. The nobility of this kingdom should be ashamed. He asks to show how Noel wields a sword. The prince says he wants to see it with his own eyes. The girl hugs him and puts her hand over his mouth to stop him talking. She says he's just a fanatic. Schwartz informs the main character that in this country he cannot even get the well-deserved title of hero. The prince throws his arms out to the sides and says that, however, if the guy moves to his kingdom, he can get the title of duke or knighthood without making any effort. Schwartz presents the main character with a bunch of awards, as well as a beautiful mansion. Of course, he will be awarded. He will be respected for his exploits, and we must also not forget about respect at the national level. The main character calmly looks at the prince and asks him if he promises, if he moves to the Tent Kingdom, that he will save the life of the hero. There are goats in a pen outside. Schwartz gives the guy a positive answer and says that he will not have to live in such a shabby place. All the girls are looking at Noel with concern. The main character asks the prince if he is telling the truth. Schwartz says it's all true, asks him to think about the offer. However, contrary to the prince's wishes, the main character informs him that, in this case, it makes no sense for him to move. Prince Schwartz looks at Noel in surprise. Not understanding him, he asks if he can find out why. The guy pulls his palm forward and admits that he does not care about the title and glory of the hero. The people here are important to him. The prince asks why. The main character turns away from him and says that everyone here trusts him and the job is worth it. That's all he needs right now. Noel leans over to Aqua and asks her if everything will be different without him. Aqua gives a positive answer without a doubt and says that she would not forgive him if he just left. Another girl looks longingly at the main character, confessing to him that she wants to live with him. The main character turns back to Schwartz and asks him if he sees it. Schwartz stands in surprise. The girl holds him by the back and tells him to rest and leave it to her. Gerza asks the prince if the girl with a sweet tooth is also from the kingdom of Schweier, and if she is of noble blood, like the prince himself. The girl stands with her hands on her hips. The prince apologizes for not introducing her earlier. He points at her with his hand and says that she is the Holy Queen Mitraj, a representative of the Holy Nation. Everyone looks at the queen and is surprised that she is the Holy Queen, the highest ranking in the church. The main character asks them if they care about anything else. The queen raises her hand up and informs that there is, however this issue is different, it concerns the protection of Sakonea. Noel looks at her in silence. The girl queen puts her hand to her heart and confesses to them that she really wants to conquer this kingdom. Noel asks the queen again about the words that she wants to take over the kingdom. Gurzas asks her to wait and asks what she just blurted out. The girl represents the king and the prince, informing them that, more precisely, it is the royal family that will be destroyed. The reason is that they appropriated the merits of the hero chosen by the goddess, and even targeted his life. The queen looks at them and loudly declares that in a world where everyone worships the goddess, there is no more sin. Gurzas thinks about it, and then replies that this is right, but how can they go against the king? The girl queen talks about how people are now suffering from the troubles caused by the royal family. She represents the prince with his bride. They raised taxes on the construction of the mansion and the outstanding wedding ceremony of the prince and the saint, without thinking at all about the consequences for the people. But no one dares to go against Prince Cain, who allegedly defeated the Demon King. That's why people are offended. They are more outraged than ever before. There is a crowd of people who are angry. The girl stands in front of Noelle and says that in addition to this, there is a crop failure throughout the kingdom, adding fuel to the fire. She remembers the fields and says that the harvest in this village is surprisingly excellent. She says that it looks like it's all thanks to the goddess of the earth, full of divine spirit. It's amazing. Aqua is standing behind, admiring herself, but her nose is growing. The queen represents a flying girl with her arms out to the sides. The queen informs that it is a bound oracle that the goddess has passed on, a quiet life for people. She says that this royal family has forgotten something. They have lost the right to control other people. Knights with flags are standing in front of the castle. If the holy nation starts this, everything will turn into a war. It will be better to settle everything from the inside. She admits that this is why she asked Prince Schwartz for help. The prince listens to her in silence. After that, Schwartz says that they were collecting information about the kingdom. He can't say it out loud, but they found some traitors. Schwartz recalls Prince Cain with his bride, and says that there are even people entering the royal chambers. The queen stands in front of the main character and says that, summing up, they want him to take part in this revolution too. The guy thinks about it. Aqua looks at Noelle, who informs her that he agrees that the current government is not capable of uniting the kingdoms, but he will not leave the village. Schwartz tells the main character to think about it, because this is a good opportunity to take revenge on the king who appropriated your achievements for conquering the Demon King. The queen says that if he can overthrow them, then not only Satinia, but he can stop living as a recluse in this wilderness. The prince suggests that he agree, because it's all in order to restore his fame. The guy apologizes, because he won't change his beliefs. Noelle tells Schwartz and the queen that no matter how much they discuss this topic, they are still unlikely to fully understand it. They're looking at the guy. He tells them that, however, there is something they can see just by having dinner together. The main character turns around and invites them to follow him in order to see the village. Mushrooms are fried on the grill. The queen takes a skewer with mushrooms and vegetables and takes a bite, tasting it. Her face becomes joyful. Because she liked the taste, she asks if it's all the power of good ingredients, says it's very tasty. The main character tells them to take as much as they want. The queen puts food on the prince's plate and says that it is bitter and she will leave it to him. The prince is displeased to inform her that she is no longer a child. Prince Schwartz stands in front of the trees and thanks the main character, saying that everything was really delicious. Aqua picks up the skewer, and Sanya comes to the table with a tray of food. Asarina stands in front of the masked people, showing them something. Gurzas continues to fry something, and says that he is pleased to see how everyone is happy and eating delicious food with smiles on their faces. This is what he likes to see. Barrels, boxes, and bags are located in the warehouse. Prince Schwartz reports that he recently looked at the granary and concluded that the power of the earth goddess is not so effective. At the table, the queen tells him that it is because Noelle was chosen by her. There is no doubt about it. They continue to eat fried food. The prince brings a skewer to his mouth, saying before that it is impossible to imagine such a wonderful dinner in this deserted village. If he liked it, then he needs to tell Sarah about it, because she is the one who gets all the food. Sarah carries a pig carcass on a stick. Everyone looks at Sarah, and the prince asks if she is a demon and why she lives with them. Sarah smiles, listening to their conversation. Noelle looks at the girl and tells her that she had nowhere else to go, so he asked her to help him repair the village. The queen eats and asks the guy if she doesn't consider him an enemy after defeating the king. Noelle starts talking about it. The main character with a serious face informs that this is not a reason to leave her in trouble. The queen looks at the guy with the same serious face. After that, she lets out a laugh and says that's for sure. Noelle looks at her questioningly. Someone calls the guy by his first name. Alina points back, pointing at the masked guys and their leader. She reports that they promised not to tell anyone about the village. The main character with a skewer in his hand thanks her and asks if it suits her. The girl gives a positive answer and asks if the guy believes everything she says, and there's nothing wrong with that. Noel gets up from the table and talks about bringing meat now, and then asks the queen if she can still eat. Delighted with the food, the girl answers him that of course she can. Prince Schwartz looks at them. Noel stands next to Sarah and says something to her. Schwartz tells the queen that he is beginning to understand the reason why Noel cannot leave the village. Those who recently attacked the village are now sitting and eating with them. It's strange. The prince represents the masked men. Schwartz is going to drink from a mug, and with a smile informs that Noel can accept anyone because of his heroic endurance. The queen replies that it is, even despite the position and race. It's a cozy and friendly place for them. No matter how long someone searches, it's hard to find a place like this. The guy plows the ground with a hoe. The queen says that in addition, since he was betrayed in the kingdom, he found the strength to build his own house. The girl says that, however, as long as he remains a former hero, he cannot ignore the situation in the kingdom. Something is burning in the middle of the trees. Sarah asks the main character about what he said at the table in advance. If he wants to fight for his rightful place, then can she be with him? The guy holds some dishes in his hands and looks at the girl, telling her that he does not think, because he does not want to take part in a coup d'etat. He looks at her with a smile and informs her that if the matter concerns this village, he will be glad if she stays on his side. Sarah is happy and tells the main character that of course it will be so. She asks him to rely on her. The girl stumbles and asks the guy if she can always be with him. Noel asks again, but the girl is embarrassed and does not repeat it again. There is a horse standing under a tree with fallen leaves in front of the building. Someone slaps her on the back and tells her that he's done. Gerza stands next to the horse and holds his head, asking Noel if the Holy Queen and Prince Schwartz have left. The guy gives Tom a positive answer. Gerza reports that they will begin preparations for a coup as soon as they return. It is difficult for him to hear this, being a knight. Noel and Sonia are standing in front of him. The guy reports about the guys in masks that their anti-assault team is nowhere to be seen. Noel says they left before dawn, probably didn't want to be noticed. Sonia asks Gerza if her father will fight the Holy Queen. The guy denies this, because after the attack on her, the commander is likely to leave his post. He thinks about it, lets go of his head and says that even the commander does not cease to be a patriot. He should have thought about whether the king is worthy of his loyalty. Noel and Sonia look after Gerza, who is riding away on a horse. The girl turns and asks the main character about what is going to happen to their kingdom. The guy looks at her and replies that it doesn't matter what happens, because they won't change. They will build a village together, get rid of those who interfere with them, and do it all together. Sonia is silent and thinking. She understands that even if Noel does not change himself, but everything will change anyway. The guy addresses her by her first name. The girl repeats his words that it doesn't matter what happens. Sonia goes to the house and with a smile offers Noel to wash the dishes, because they had a lot of visitors. The guy agrees. Sonia's mansion. Noel is standing in front of some man and holding something in his hands. He says that he could not even think that the acquaintance that Sonia was talking about was a meeting with a farmer. The man informs the main character that, although he did him a great favor, however, given the recent problems with the harvest, it is very difficult to find high-quality goods. There is a pile of carrots. The farmer says that next time he would like to buy these beautiful vegetables. Noel looks up. Noel asks the farmer to wait a bit, because there is something else he wants to offer him. The farmer asks with a smile what it is. Suddenly he looks to the side and sees in front of him an animal with fangs, an arrow sticking out of its side. The farmer gets scared and puts his hand in front of him, shouting at the same time. Suddenly, another arrow flies into the animal and pierces it. The farmer falls to the ground and looks in shock at the fallen animal, from which several arrows stick out in different parts of the body. Sarah smiles and holds the bow in her hands, saying that she drove it all the way here so as not to drag the carcass by hand. It's good that they met in time. The frightened farmer agrees, saying that it is really good. There is a tree in front of the house. Inside, someone pours a bag of coins on the table. There are different drawings on the coins. Everyone looks at the coins. Aqua is surprised and asks if it's all the proceeds for the vegetables. Noel gives a positive answer and says that this is plus the loot that Sarah caught for 5,000 gold. Aqua stands next to the main character and looks at him, asking what they will buy with them, snacks or sweets. The guy answers her that he wanted to buy seeds for a new crop. The girl sighs in frustration. The main character raises his finger up and tells them that they need to think about how to increase income when the village's population grows. Someone pours the contents of a teapot into a cup that stands next to other dishes. Aqua looks at it, calling it a forest poppy. Sardinia tells us that this is a wild plant known as a hallucinogenic vegetable. It is sold for a lot of money, apparently it was grown here before. Aqua says she understands and thinks about it, after which she asks if she can find him, if she can eat all the sweets she wants. Noelle looks at her in disbelief. The guy thinks about it, because he looked for it in the village, but most likely he looked through it. Sarah raises her hand and asks if she can tell. The girl says that she found a place that interested her. It is located about halfway up the mountain. Mountains are located in the middle of the forest. Sarah points her hand forward and says it's here. Alina says that there are harmful poisonous fumes. It seems that they come from the earth. The guys are standing in the middle of the trees. In order to grow various crops freely, they need to first deal with the fumes. Noelle asks Ina if there is anything she can do. The girl replies that she can, if everything is so bad. Aina raises her hand up and looks in the same direction. Glowing lightning appears around. The girl calls it cleansing. The sky is cloudy. The sun is not visible. Ina asks if it's okay now. The guy gives a positive answer and suggests that the guys move on. In places, plants of different shapes grow in the middle of the grass. This is a magical place. It is so beautiful here that it resembles a divine abode. To think that such a beautiful place is located next to the toxic earth. Sarah looks ahead and reports what she has found. Everyone is looking at a plant with large petals. Sarah says it's flickering. Ainina says that nothing else was expected from Sarah. The girl plucks a glowing flower from the ground. But after that, for some unknown reason, it stops flickering. Sarah looks at him and does not understand how the flicker disappeared. Noelle says it means it stops flashing when she rips it off. Sarah, with the extinguished flower in her hands, raises her head and asks Noelle if the flower will taste worse if it does not shine. He gives her a positive answer. The main character turns to Ina with a serious face and asks her if anything has occurred to her. The girl replies that she knows and will try now. She holds one hand out in front of her, and lightning flashes appear around her. She says it seems to have worked. Symbols began to appear around the flower, after which it glittered again. Sarah and Ayana look at the flower in surprise, and Sarah is surprised that Ayana can even do this. The girl holds her hand up to the flower again and says that perhaps the magic of cold will also descend. Noelle warns her that if she freezes it to ice, the taste will also be lost, so it's enough just to cool it. The main character reports that this will keep the flower fresh for a long time. The shining flower was placed in a basket. Noelle says there are probably more such flowers nearby. Adina asks for permission to do magic spells. She will use them when we find more. Sarah says she's already found it. There are many identical flowers shining in the basket. Akina is lying next to her, tired, saying that her energy supply is running out. Noelle's hand touches Aina's head, which makes her surprised. The girl apologizes. The guy asks if she used too much mana. He asks her to rest for a while. He will collect water for now, if there is a river nearby. Sarah holds one of the flowers and sits on a stone. Sarah says that, thanks to Agina's magic, their goal has been achieved for today. Agina awkwardly admits that Noelle can cast the same spells. Sarah looks at Aina and asks if this is true. Aina gives a positive answer. She remembers Noelle in armor and says that he did everything on his own when they conquered the Demon King. Aina stretches her arms with a smile and says that she always thinks that he doesn't really need her, but she let her do her job today. Sarah remembers how she killed the beast with a bow and says that she understands, because she was hunting today too. Although he could easily have killed the monster even before she fired the arrow, but he did not do it. Aina asks Sarah if everything is built on trust, because Noelle believes in them, gives different assignments and tasks. Sarah remembers Noelle talking to the Queen and Prince Schwartz. She says that he rejected the Holy Queen's offer then, but she didn't believe it. The girl looks at the flower in her hands and says that she then thought that if it was only for the common good, then he should accept the offer. The girl remembers the Holy Queen and the commander, asking if this means that he trusts the Holy Queen and the people of the kingdom, whether he believes them too. Aina sighs and shrugs, saying that maybe he just wants to save himself and the people he wants to protect from the war. Sarah blushes slightly and asks if this is because there are people who are ready to fight with him shoulder to shoulder. Noelle arrives and holds a bottle in his hand, saying that he brought water. The main character asks Sarah what happened, because her face is red. The girl blushes even more and replies that nothing happened. Everyone came home. There is a plate with flower petals on the table. Sonia says with a smile that she dipped them in batter and fried them. All the girls try the flower. Aina reports that it is delicious, and Aqua smiles and says that it seems as if her cheeks are melting. The main character looks at the flower with admiration and dreams about what would happen if he could grow them. Sanya remembers the farmer and says that she has heard that this is impossible because it requires clean spring water. Sarah thinks about clean water. Suddenly, everyone at the table is looking straight at Aqua. She asks the guys in disbelief what happened. Noel puts his hand on her shoulder, saying that he leaves it to her. Sanya and Aqua are squatting on the street and smiling in front of a shining flower, which they still manage to grow. He and Gertzas are sitting at a table in the main character's house with a mug. Noel asks Gertzas if he will participate in the coup. With his eyes closed, holding his head, the guy replies that since the general has become the head of the army, he will have to join. The main character thinks about it and says that he can't do anything about it. The general has finally made a decision. Gertzas reports that he doubted because he was worried about the safety of Sanya. Then Prince Schwartz told him that there was nothing to worry about when her former hero was protecting her, so he was able to convince him. The Holy Queen stands in front of people next to the church. The church is under the patronage of the Holy Queen, so most likely they will be on her side. Prince Schwartz stands in front of the clock tower, also next to a crowd of hooded people. The position of the magicians is not yet clear, and this upsets the prince. The group is quite closed, so we manage to get only a little information. The main character notices Aina, who is standing in the doorway and listening to their conversation. The girl tells Noel that she will get something for him. The guy asks if she's sure about it. Avina replies that although she is not obliged to participate in the coup, she does not want to turn a blind eye to it. The girl's face becomes serious. The main character confesses to the girl that he does not care whether this coup will be successful. Aina is surprised. Noel looks at her and says that they need her in the village, so she must promise that she will return. After the unexpected words of the main character, the girl blushes and then looks away and agrees with him. Amina is standing in the middle of the trees, waving to the guys. She has a briefcase on her back. Mountains are visible behind her. Sanya, Aqua, Sarah, and Noel look after her. Aqua says that she's gone. Noel throws a large basket on his back and says that in that case he will go too. Aqua looks at him and asks where to go. The main character remembers the shining flower and says that he will go to look for more Jilomicon because he wants to send them as provisions to the army, Gertzas ordered. The flower eliminates fatigue very well. Noel stands in front of Aqua and with a smile informs her that, unfortunately, he did not have time to collect it when it was ripe. Gertzas is sitting next to a pig and a bunch of vegetables, waving to someone with a smile. The vegetables and the loot that Sarah had collected were all given to Gertzas. It doesn't matter how much provisions the army has, they'll need more anyway. Noel thinks about it and informs them that they were paid a lot, so they eventually earned about 10,000 gold. Sarah denies this, saying that she bought a lot of traps and farming tools, so there's not much money left. Sanya adds that she bought spices and kitchen utensils. Aqua recalls that they also bought seeds. The guy folds his hands and thinks about it, and then wants to say that since everyone can do accounting, however, he is interrupted by Aqua, who asked if he said something about cupcakes. Noel denies and says he's talking about accounting. Sanya holds her cheek and says that princesses are not taught this. Sarah says that the demonic race doesn't have bookkeepers and accountants either. Aqua pulls Noel's clothes and asks when they will buy cupcakes in that case. Suddenly, someone tells the guys that if it comes to budget management, he offers them his help. Someone stands in front of them. Everyone is looking at him. The main character asks the man who he is. The girl stretches out her hand to them and says that she is glad to meet Noel. She is gifted with the ability to work with numbers. An unknown girl with a bow on her head looks forward and stretches out her hand, saying that her name is Lily Tent. Her brother asked her to help them in the village. By her last name, the main character understands that this girl is somehow connected with Prince Schwartz. He looks at Lily and remembers the prince. The girl says that she is his younger sister, remembers how her brother told her about Noel, and confesses this to him. The guy says he's grateful for the offer, but why her? The girl smiles and says that he is a rock, that they should be in touch with them, so he chose such a talented one whom he trusts to help them. Lilia puts her hand on herself and tells them that she studied finance and taxation from an early age so they can relax, because she will help them. In Noel's house, there are mountains of coins in the drawers, as well as just a mountain of paper bills on the floor. Lilia asks the guy what it is. He answers her that up to this point they had not dealt with finances. The situation is quite complicated. Lilia looks at the money in surprise. Lilia calmly says that although the situation is not easy, it can still be solved in an hour. She asks to assign her another task when she is done with this one. Noel looks at Lily questioningly in surprise. The guy denies and says that even he understands that this is impossible, and if she fails, she will not be forced to return, so she can take her time and do everything evenly. Noel enters the room where Lily is sleeping at the table. He looks at her and says with a smile that it must be very tiring. He thinks to brew her some tea from Jalomicon. The guy looks at the book on the table with a beautiful shiny cover and wonders if she's finished yet. The girl wakes up with a red face. Lilia rubs her face with her hand and opens one eye. Seeing the guy, says that he has finally returned. She asks if she did not say that she would cope quickly. The girl puts her hand on her book and informs that all the checks are sorted in this account book. Lilia puts 2 more stacks of books on the table and says that she also compared the prices of harvest goods in the village shops with the average market price, took into account problematic aspects and things that need to be improved, and analyzed trade plans. The girl shows the guy a page from one of her books and says that, for example, in the kingdom of Schweier, the price is like this. Although there are hungry times there, it seems to her that in this case it is better to raise prices. She happily raises her hand with the book and says that the quality is too good. Her brother was delighted and suggests that Noel gradually turn it all into a whole trademark. The guy listens to the girl in disbelief. Lilia holds a book in front of her and asks the main character how he thinks if he makes her an accountant, she will be able to say with confidence that his income will grow after that. The main character looks at a stack of books in incomprehension, after which he wonders if this is magic. The girl continues to hold the book and with a serious face says that there are still some concerns. There are houses in front of the castle, between which the village grows in places. Banners hang on the walls of the castle. Nothing is clear about the revolution yet. An armored commander stands in front of a crowd of armored knights who are going to listen to him. A banner hangs behind him. He looks at them with a serious face. The girls were sitting in the water and chatting. The blonde, closing her eyes, flexed her arms, stretching them forward and saying how pleased she was. Sarah agreed with her, saying how soothing and refreshing it was. That's what a hot spring means. The girls were smiling contentedly. They should thank Aqua and Noel for that. The hero stood with a pickaxe in his hand, slinging it over his shoulder. Aqua stood beside him, rejoicing and holding her hands up. In front of them was a pit from which water gushed out like a fountain, filling the empty space. There were shouts of acquiescence from Aqua, who added that thanks to her. She jumped into the air, flying over the other 2 girls. Her long hair also flew up. The girls looked surprised, covering their mouths with their hands. Aqua landed in the water and raised a big wave, saying how awesome this one is. The 3rd girl stood wrapped in a towel and entered the water only up to her knees. She asked Aqua how she managed to make such a gorgeous outdoor spring. Aqua sat with a contented face, almost completely immersed in the water, and closed her eyes. She replied to the girl next to her that it was an ordinary stamina recovery. And of course the benefits for the skin, it becomes soft and smooth. The girl with the square looked thoughtfully at the side with her fingers close to her face. She thinks it might be a good tourist attraction. Aqua lay down next to her on a small beach and looked very pleased with these procedures. The blonde was standing in the water, looking ahead with her big eyes and a worried face. She asked if tourists would visit them. The girl with the short haircut smiled, holding up her finger. She looked confident when she replied to the blonde that she was just thinking about the prospect. After that, she turned her head to Aqua and called her with a satisfied smile and told her that she could take care of her back. Aqua looked pleased with her words and whistled to the newcomer that she was very perceptive, wasn't she? It's time the new girl approached Aqua to rub her back. The blonde between them stroked the tips of her hair. She decided to ask the others, what about the water here? The girls turned to look at her. The blonde began to swim up to another girl, leaving the newcomer and Aqua. Sarah noticed this and turned her head in her direction, asking her what it was. The blonde looked unhappy or pensive about something. The girls were standing in the water opposite each other. The blonde called out to Sarah San, asking what she thought about Lily San. Sarah stared at the girl in front of her with her mouth slightly open. She turned to the side and put her fingers on her chin, looking thoughtful. She replied that Lilia was very talented. She has helped them a lot since she started managing finances. The blonde looked down excitedly and looked very worried about something. Pausing between words as if not knowing how to tell, she nevertheless shared that she had actually recently heard Noel and Gersis talking when she was serving tea in the past. A girl in uniform entered the room holding a tray with 2 clear glasses on it. One of the 2 men on the sidelines was talking about Prince Schwartz. The girl was looking in their direction. Gersis was sitting across from Noel, leaning his elbows on the table with his fingers crossed. He didn't understand why the prince was so close to the king. He deliberately wants to ignite a conflict right in the nearest kingdom. Noel asked if this was not an order from the Holy Queen. Gerzas replied to Noel that this was probably one of the reasons. Maybe it's because he knows that Noel is a hero. The guy looked at him questioningly after these words. Gerzas rubbed his chin with his fingers while looking at the young man. Gerzas explained that the power to defeat the Demon King greatly hinders the upper class of the kingdom. And this power, easily destroying the balance of power between nations, got out of control of the authorities. No wonder he has such thoughts on his mind. Noel spread his hands to the side, saying that initially it was Prince Cain who was given out as a hero. As soon as he found out that Noel was a real hero, he should have relaxed. Gerzas put a book on the table in front of Noel. The book was called "The Failed Prince is Actually the Hero Who Defeated the Demon King." The cover of the book depicted the prince himself with a sword in his hands and a girl. Gerzas explained to the hero that this biography was created in order to show how good Prince Cain is, and everyone is obliged to buy it. Noel silently took the book in his hands and began to quickly flip through its pages. The man in front of him added that they were forced to publish such a book because everyone knew how weak Prince Cain really was. The prince, surrounded by 2 armored knights, looked very tired and weakened, holding a thin sword in his hands near the ground. Of course, some people believed what was written there. They even thought that they should have killed the Demon King in a more vile and cruel way. Many books of Prince Cain's biography were on the shelves. Gerzas said that, but still, everything in this biography is true except the name of the hero. They don't know how vigilant the other kingdoms are. Noel didn't answer, silently staring at the man in front of him when he finished speaking. Currently, Sarah stood with her head slightly down and clutched her chin with her fingers. She understood everything, that's the point. The blonde in front of her abruptly stood up from the water, shouting that Lilia-san had also come at the request of Prince Schwartz. Whether she has an ulterior motive, Sarah looked up at her in surprise. The girl replied that in that case, whoever Noel accepted, she would follow him. She looked confident talking about it to the blonde. Crossing her arms over her chest, the girl looked worried, saying that Noel and Lily seemed to be going shopping this time. She asked what if something happened to him. Sarah replied that Noel is capable of anything, no matter who opposes him. Blushing, the girl shouted that she would also go shopping with Lily, because she doesn't think they can go together. She threw her arms out to the sides, clenching her fists tightly. Sarah held out her hands in the direction of the blonde, who had turned away. She asked if she was thinking too much. The blonde has already gone into her own thoughts, saying that it is necessary to make sure that she does not leave any loopholes. Sarah asked if she even heard what she said. A little later in the city, Lilia was calling Sania-san to her. The blonde, slightly stammering, agreed with her. Lilia turned her head towards the girl and pointed at herself, and said that she had carefully studied the prices in the local shops, and now she would show the cheapest ones. She was smiling sweetly at Sanya. Lilia walked in front, humming a song with a big smile. Sanya, who was walking behind her, looked around anxiously, turning her head. They walked down the street between the high-rise buildings. Someone appeared in front of them, blocking the way and telling them to wait. Only the man's boots were visible. The girls were surrounded by men who looked like bandits. There were buildings on the sides, and behind and in front the way was blocked. The one who blocked their way was the very first to say that if they went any further, they would be charged a fee. Sanya hid behind Lilia's back. Lilia was silent at first, and then briefly asked how much. Sanya continued to hide behind the smaller girl. The man who blocked their path was much bigger and taller than them. He told Lilia that it was worth 110 gold pieces. Lilia's face was serious, and without a shadow of fear on it. She replied to the man that guys like him are greedy for easy profits. 16 gold is a fair price, even considering recent inflation. The man looked confident. He replied with a grin that he did not make discounts. She just needs to pay if she doesn't want any problems. Although she can pay with her body. Lily's cape fell off one shoulder. She paused and asked what, even if they screamed loudly. The man said they were stupid because no one would come to this place. They stood opposite each other while they were talking. Lilia tilted her head down slightly, which hid her eyes with bangs. The girl grinned, gasping and asking if it was true. Sanya, who was behind Lilia, turned out to be in front when the girl pushed her with her palms in the back, pushing herself in front. She said that in that case she would count on her. Sanya looked back at her, asking confusedly to herself. When she came face to face with the bandit, the girl clenched her hands into fists and mumbled uncertainly, opening her mouth trying to say something. After a moment, the girl, blushing, closed her eyes and screamed. She stuttered and stretched her words, shouting for someone to help them. The man in front of them snorted, starting to laugh at them. He said they'd stop wasting time. Behind the bandit was Noel, who asked if they called him. The rest of the bandits who were behind that man were already lying unconscious on the asphalt. The man's face was scared, and he wasn't laughing anymore. One of the girls called out to Noel-san. The main character stood looking forward while his hair was developing. A little bit later, a beautiful building, in front of which there was a large fountain with many railings around it. Lilia looked very pleased, telling the hero that she couldn't believe she saw Noel fighting herself. She considered herself very lucky. The girl put her palms together in front of her, as if in prayer. She added after the last words that she already sees how her brother will get. In my mind was a blond man with glasses who was looking ahead with a menacing look. Noel smiled sheepishly at her words, saying that it was nothing. Lilia asked if she understood correctly that a crowd of villains like those guys were just child's play for the former hero. A bird flew past the girl. The bird appeared above her head and the girl, turning to the side, gasped. She held out her hand, and the bird began to land on the outstretched hand. The girl said that it was her brother's pigeon. She asked for forgiveness. Someone said that Sonia is here. A transparent glass with some liquid was handed to the blonde. The girl, turning her attention to this, stuttered her thanks to the guy. Holding onto the glass with both hands, the girl lowered her head down, asking how he knew they were in trouble. The guy, sitting next to her on the bench, looked at the girl and replied that it was because he was nearby and worried about her. The girl finally raised her head and turned it, looking at the guy next to her. She first repeated his words that he was worried, and then paused and asked about her. The guy kept looking at her. She tilted her head slightly again and said that as far as she understood, Noel-san was also thinking about the lily. Sonia mumbled and then apologized to him. She told me that she had recently overheard his conversation with Gerzus. The guy did not take his eyes off her and listened in silence. He turned his head away and tilted it down, closing his eyes and smiling. He replied that Lilia was now their ally, living in the same village with them. There's nothing to think about. The girl was looking down, holding the glass with both hands. She did not respond to the hero's words and remained silent. Finally, she said she didn't understand. How can he trust others so easily? He had already been betrayed in the kingdom, but he still accepted even the demon, Sarah. The girl does not understand how to become a person like him, sincerely accepting people. Noel called out to Sonia, calling her by name. The guy said he was sorry. The girl said that after the engagement with Kane broke off, it was hard for her to trust anyone. The guy leaned back, leaning against the back of the bench. He said that since they share the pain of betrayal, the courage to trust others is a good foundation for human connections, and he believes in a bright future for the village with strong friendly ties. Therefore, he hopes that Sonia will be able to trust him and everyone in the village. The girl was wiping the tears from her eyes with her fingers. Courage. Faith in the future. And by the way, she wondered why he was so worried about her. The guy, looking at her, gasped. It turned out that since the revolution was breaking out everywhere, he expected that the target of the king's army would be the family of General Gusher. So just in case, she assigned Sarah to protect her. Lilia had foreseen his actions well based on calculations. The girl smiled awkwardly, closing her eyes. She understood where everything was going. She had no idea. Noel smiled, saying that since he did it all without saying a word to her, it seems that he and Sarah have succeeded. The girl in front of him smiled back at him. Sonia blushed and thanked the guy. She didn't doubt it. She looked away from him and stared at the glass in her hands while her whole face was blushing. Noel looked at her questioningly. Lily was running from the side and waving at them. Her brother's pigeon was sitting quietly on her head. I apologized to the guys for making them wait. The girl stood in front of Noel, and the guy asked if something had happened. The girl mumbled, pressing her palms to her chest. The girl, scratching her temple with her finger with an excited face, told that the rebel army had lost. Sonia sat with her mouth slightly open and looked ahead with Noel. Two armored knights stood in the middle of the trees, holding swords in their hands, pointing them forward. Some of them stuttered and shouted that they needed to retreat. Their opponent was strong. The man grinned at their screams, saying that they were just ordinary rabble milling around. The man with long hair raised his sword up, saying that they would all go straight to hell. He was fully clad in armor, and a cloak was flowing behind him. Currently, Lilia told the guys that, however, the uprising could not be considered a complete failure. The girl clenched her fist and looked inspired, saying that, for reference, General Gusher remained unharmed. So Sonia-san can relax. Sonia closed her eyes, put her hands on her chest and sighed, relaxing, saying what a relief it was. Noelle, Sonia, Sarah, and Aqua were sitting at the table together, while Lilia was standing nearby. Sarah asked with a serious face what was the reason for the defeat. Lilia said that she seemed to have underestimated the real strength of Knight Commander Guadala. Even some of the general's subordinates were unable to resist him. He calmly calculated her brother's strategy. Lilia remembered this man. Noelle outshone Guadala during the battles against the Demon King. But the fact that he was chosen to join the hero's army means that his strength is genuine. A man wounded one of the armored knights with his sword and blood was spilled around. Noelle, looking forward, touched his chin with his fingers, and with a thoughtful face said the name of Guadala. Lily looked at the hero standing in front of him and told Noelle that, for now, her brother has one request for him. The guy, without listening to the request from the girl, beat her to it, asking if her brother wanted him to take part in the war. The girl, tilting her head slightly to the side, answered him that no, he just needed vegetables from the village. But he wants Noelle to deliver them personally. There were various vegetables, such as carrots and cabbage, on a small wooden cart. The guy asked about the vegetables. Of course he doesn't mind, but Fulton. The girl added that this place is very close to the battlefield. She's afraid he might get hurt. The guy answered Lilia with a smile that everything was fine, he would do it. The girl, clutching her chin, said that, then, according to her brother's instructions. There was a map of the area on the table, and the girl pointed her finger at one point, adding that he could take this detour road. At this time, the battlefield is in place. There were a lot of people in the big tent. 4 knights in armor were in different parts of the tent going about their business. In the middle was a huge table, at which Guadal was sitting, looking at the knight next to him. Prince Cain and a girl were walking towards them from the side. He praised General Goodall, saying it was an amazing victory. The general asked in surprise why they were here, what kind of problems. The prince replied that this was not the case, they just wanted to visit him. The prince said that despite the victory, the general was in a bad mood and asked why. The general snorted in displeasure, crossing his arms over his chest. He replied to Cain that if he decided to spend his leisure time visiting him, why not train the court magicians instead? If they had participated in the previous battles, they would already be celebrating victory in the capital by now. Goodall tilted his head slightly down, bringing his fist close to his face. The prince smiled radiantly, waving his hand. He replied that it was fine, he didn't mind. They will arrive soon and will definitely take part in the next battle. The girl who came with the prince, closing her eyes with a smile, clung to Cain. The general shouted with a displeased face that he didn't care if the magicians were late or if the church supported them. The prince should show more nobility as a member of the royal family. The prince, smiling, replied that that was why he believed in Guadala. They must defeat the rebels so that they can rally the kingdom. Behind the prince were 2 knights who were dragging a long wooden box. The prince pointed at them with a gasp. He remembered that His Majesty admired the general, who had shown himself so vividly on the battlefield. Here is his reward. In the box that the knights were carrying, there was a long sword that was lying in the cloth. A black, ominous haze seemed to accumulate around this weapon. The general sat down by the box and took the hilt of his sword in his hand. The prince explained that this sword was a family heirloom of the royal family. According to legend, it was sacrificed as a sign of Welder's death in order to drive away the evil god. The general got to his feet and examined the sword in his hands. He asked if it was a historical antique. Cain went on to say that it is believed that the evil god will return if the sword is filled with blood. It doesn't sound very good. The girl who hugged the prince looked at him with a smile, saying that then he would receive more merits and titles. She clarified, that wasn't it good. This time he will become a real hero. Goodall's face twisted into a sinister smile after that. The general, with a satisfied smile, sheathed his new sword on his belt, loudly replying that whether it was an evil god or a gusher, he would become another step on the path to glory. He called out to everyone, saying it was time to start. At this time, on the other side of the battlefield, General Gusher was sitting at the table, leaning his elbows on the surface and resting his chin on his clasped palms. Gurzus was standing at his side, raising his hand so that the bird could land on it. The general opened the message looking at him. The bird immediately flew away, soaring into the sky. Gurzus, looking at the general sitting next to him, said that at last the court magicians began to act. They were looking at the map in front of them, where the marks were marked. On the right flank there are magicians, and on the left there is a knight's order under the leadership of Guadala. They stand like a claw. If they are attacked, they can be completely destroyed. General Gouchard stared at the map in front of him in silence, narrowing his eyes. A drop of sweat trickled down his cheek. Gurzas asked where Prince Schwartz was, by the way. He said that it was necessary to retreat here. They don't understand his strategy. A knight standing at their side informed the men that Prince Schwartz had gone on patrol this morning. He's not back yet. Gurzas and Gouchard immediately looked at the knight in surprise. One of them screamed, asking what he had said. Gurzas seemed to have an idea that maybe Prince Schwartz, or rather the Kingdom of Schwier, wanted to stab them in the back and take advantage of a good opportunity. A little later, a big road. Many armored soldiers rode their horses into the gorge. Some of them had huge flags on their backs. One of the soldiers tilted slightly to the side and stopped. General Guindal, who was riding behind him, called out to him, asking what the delay was. A knight on horseback appeared in front, who apologized and informed the general that the carriage blocked their path. Godard was yelling, asking about the cart again. He ordered his subordinates to remove her now. The soldier hesitated slightly, answering that the man who was leading her was a bit problematic. Guindal started insulting his subordinate, and then asked if he had forgotten that they were actually an army. He said that was enough. The general rushed forward on his horse. Stopping and holding the horse by the reins, he asked what he was doing at all. Ahead, a man could be seen driving a cart, holding the reins of the horses in his hands. He asked if it was a buzz, and added that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The general looked ahead and asked what the problem was. When he saw who was in front of him, he shouted Noel's name stuttering. He shouted that it was impossible because he should be dead. The hero looked ahead without expressing any emotions. Woodall seemed to have gone through. He looked at the hero in shock, asking how he was able to survive, or better to ask where he was. His mouth and eyes were wide open in disbelief as he stared ahead. The hero, unlike the general, answered calmly that a lot of things had happened, but now he just grows crops and sells them. He's doing the delivery now. He was looking away, holding the reins. The general went into his thoughts thinking about this guy. Does he know about the plans to make Prince Cain a hero, and does he know that they betrayed him? Goudal stared ahead, frozen and wondering these questions. There were a lot of wooden boxes filled with various vegetables in the cart. The general suggested to Noel that he buy these vegetables from him. He would pay double the amount, and Noel would just go home. Noel pretended to think hard about his offer and thoughtfully chuckled, repeating the offer of double the amount. But he needs to fulfill a deal made in advance. He cannot bargain with him. The general seemed to be shocked, his face distorted in disbelief. He mentally insulted the hero by asking that he did not know where his place was. Pulling a smile on his face, the man stuttered and suggested that then he would increase the profit tenfold. If he's so worried about the deal, he can redeliver the groceries when he gets back. In any case, he will buy everything he has. Just let him accept the offer and disappear already. Noel replied that it was interesting. In that case, he wants something more than just money. Already overjoyed, the general told the hero that he would give everything he wanted. He asked if he had what he needed with him. Noel replied that he did, but it is very expensive for the general. He asked if he was sure he agreed. He won't give it back to him even if he regrets it later. The general looked at the hero questioningly. The man pursed his lips and slightly tilted his head down, looking from under his brows with an anxious face. He was thinking about what was wrong with him. What an arrogant fool he is. Noel grinned and tilted his head slightly to the side and said that the general would like such a souvenir. Goudal was covered in sweat and stared ahead dumbfounded. His lips curled and the irises of his eyes turned white. He was repeating the hero's words about the general in his head. Is he really talking about Gouchera? Is he his ally? The hero's face changed dramatically and became menacing like a maniac's. Noel said it was time to bring it back. His irises turned white and his mouth twisted into a kind of terrible smile. The general's face contorted in a grimace of horror and sweat covered his skin. Return? Is he talking about betrayal? So he wants to kill him. Such thoughts came to Guadala after Noel's words. Goudal was worried, thinking that, as always, it was impossible to read Noel's intentions. But if he wants him dead, he really has to fight. The two men continued to stare at each other in silence, while Goudal pondered his words. Looking at the hero, he thought, what if he suddenly attacks him? Noel looked pretty calm, unlike him. They all continued to stare at each other in silence, while Goudal was thinking. The hero's face was emotionless as he looked down at his friend. He wondered if Noel was on the alert right now. He keeps looking at his sword, the one that Prince Cain gave him. Goudal was getting more and more panicked. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth opened as if in a silent scream. Beads of sweat were running down his cheeks from excitement. He was swearing to himself. He has no chance against him. In this case, he's just a dead man. Pursing his lips, Guidal still cursed unflatteringly out loud, showing his fangs and snapping his teeth. The general quickly turned his horse to the side and galloped forward, while his subordinates called out to Guidal-sama. The general looked worried, and his face showed his panic. Turning his head in their direction, Guidal said that Noel was the enemy, and everyone needed to go to the front line. They must survive. Anxiously looking back, he thought that he had to run as soon as possible before he was left alone alive. Guidal rode forward through the gorge alone, as fast as possible, leaving everyone behind him, while his knights remained in place, looking at his back. Knights in armor, drawing their swords and pointing them forward, surrounded Noel's cart from all sides, while the guy continued to sit, holding the reins in his hands, and did not move. The hero looked ahead questioningly, putting his fingers to his chin. He was asking if this sword was really that valuable. He thought General Gusher would like it if he gave it to him. He's already broken it once, though. The knights continued to stand in front of him, pointing their swords at him, but did not attack the guy yet. Noel wondered what to do with them then. 4 people were on the edge of the cliff watching what was happening below. One of them was squatting in a relaxed position. The second one stood to the side with a huge staff in her hands. The third man with a long scythe and a book was behind, along with the fourth. The magician, who was squatting with an irritated face, was straightening his long hair with his palm, combing it back. He said that the war and all this is very tiring. Someone agreed with him, saying that, of course, everything can be resolved through negotiations. The magician repeated Guidal's name and paused after asking one of the guys behind him if he meant this upstart. He ordered them court magicians to act. The magician's face was displeased. The girl behind him looked at him. Lavushka said that for this she even postponed her experiment. It's a complete mess. There were bruises under the girl's eyes, as if from lack of sleep, and her face, when she talked about being distracted, was also clearly unhappy. The man with the long braid who was standing behind was clutching a book to his chest, saying that they had already gone so far they could not complain. Moreover, it is a royal order. He offered to show them everything they are capable of. The girl quickly refused his motivating words, which did not impress her, and said that she already wanted to go home. She suggested instead to finish as soon as possible and hurry home. The second mage girl stood behind her and was silent. Finally, let's talk. The magician offered her own version of the outcome of events, asking the other guys then why don't they just forget about everything and retreat. While saying this, her face was quite serious, clearly showing that she was not joking. All 3 of them, who had been looking forward at the same time, turned to the girl standing behind them and looked at her. A male magician with a long braid and bangs on his forehead twisted his face after her words as if in disbelief and opened his mouth and began to scream. He asked if they were stupid. He made it clear to them that this was a royal order. The magician, who was squatting at the edge of the cliff, grinned and replied that he was really a fool. And by the way, speaking of such worries, Agina can handle them alone, can't she? Even an amateur like him can do it. The girl with the staff twisted her face in disgust, looking at the guy as if he was something disgusting. She said with disdain that when someone like him expresses his stupid opinion, she just can't help herself, and asked if he could tell her why. Once again, the guy with the scythe and the book intervened in the conversation. He shouted at the girl that she offered to back off, that, by the grace of the hero prince, she got the position of a magician, and became very defiant. He told her to stop talking so arrogantly. The guy at the edge of the cliff spread his arms to the sides, saying as if to offend her that the court magician chosen by the prince was what a blatant backup option. He means maybe the Demon King is very weak, since even he was able to defeat him. The girl with the staff added, saying that she did not come up to the level of court magicians in strength and remained in captivity. She had already forgotten. It's her fault that they have to expel a man to keep her place. She asked what his name was again. The guy next to her laughed, saying that she was unbearable. She even forgot her name. The girl was told that at least they were more useful than she was. The girl immediately replied that she knew that. The second mage girl heard all their bickering and stood silently without saying a word. The guy with long hair started letting magic circles out of his hands, smiling. He suggested to the others, why don't they turn these bums into ashes before they face the army? The girl with the square exhaled and said no. In fact, she was really arrogant when she thought she was capable of any kind of magic. Since she was still studying, she began to doubt her abilities and talents. She recalled various moments from the past, her battles and magic. With her eyes wide open, she looked confidently ahead, adding that, but she was definitely sure of that. It was her, not him, who was chosen to defeat the Demon King. The girl released a strong stream of lightning-like magic from her outstretched palm. Magic circles formed in the air above her palm, and each one was larger than the previous one. One of the magicians shouted that it was impossible. He was asking what kind of huge magic circle it was. How could someone like Aina be capable of such a thing? The magician stood around the girl, watching her. A huge magic circle covered the sky. Aina looked at them without fear and replied to the court magician that she would no longer let magicians like them interfere with Noel. The girl continued to use her magic. There was a tent with no ceiling and fabric walls on the street. There were boxes and a table inside. There were no people in sight. A guy with glasses abruptly appeared at the entrance and, holding up a stick, shouted, asking what they were doing. He ordered an urgent command for the offensive. On the contrary, the guy turned out to be Gurzas, all in armor. He called out to Prince Schwartz in surprise, asking where he had even been. The prince with glasses was approaching the table where the man was standing. The prince approached the table and, putting one hand on his side, knocked on the furniture with the other, saying that it did not matter. He told them to hurry up and not let this chance go to waste. One of the men on the other side of the table asked what chance he was talking about. Gurzas was trying to convey to the prince that if they went on the offensive now, they would be captured by both the Knights' Army of Guadala and the court magicians. The men looked quite calm, despite their words. The prince tilted his head slightly down and, closing his eyes, smirked smugly. He adjusted his glasses with his fingers, lifting them on the bridge of his nose. Schwartz told the men that Goodall would not be coming back. Gurzas looked shocked after the prince's words. He looked at him questioningly and clarified what the prince meant. Prince Schwartz told the allies the news that Noel Dono had dealt with him. At this time, the hero himself continued his journey forward on the cart, holding the reins of the horses in his hand. He sat casually, covering his mouth with his palm while yawning. Behind Noel's cart, which continued its way forward through the gorge, lay the Knights of General Guadala, whom he ordered to deal with the hero. Every one of them was struck by Noel's blows, and their horses galloped forward, leaving their riders. The prince threw his head up and closed his eyes and clenched his fist, rejoicing. He thought he would detain him for a while, but clearly not in this way. His strength is simply unimaginable. The prince is glad that he was able to see it firsthand. He looked very excited talking about it. He continued to praise the hero, saying that with such a fast and sharp sword he could cut through anyone who wanted to resist him. This is the ability to wield a sword at the level of a god. He clearly deserves a title, even in the name of art. The men were silent. The prince, with his arms outstretched, stood with his back to the exit of the tent and added that he was not exaggerating at all. At that moment, a huge explosion rang out in the distance behind him, engulfing the entire sky. General Gouchard and Gurzis raised their heads up, looking at what had happened. Stuttering, one of the two of them asked what kind of explosion it was. The men's faces were stunned by what was happening. One of the armored soldiers ran into the tent. He called out to his boss, calling him sir, and informed him that the explosion was connected with court magicians. All three men turned around and looked at the subordinate who had arrived with the report. The black, thick smoke after the explosion enveloped the sky like a cloud and moved forward, looking terrifying. General Gouchard screamed so much that even saliva splattered to the sides. He shouted to everyone, giving the order to advance into the royal chambers. He commanded them to hurry up and take care of time as their own lives. Knights in armor mounted horses and galloped towards the huge palace. General Gouchard shouted after them, offering in commanding tones to destroy the royal palace in an instant. Knights with flags were on the offensive. General Gouchard was rushing forward on his horse at high speed. The brothers-in-law quickly flew past him. Finally, he stood up and looked ahead. There were high hills and mountains on the horizon. There were several houses in the middle of the road between the mountain and the general. The long-haired man was very happy and smiling, surprised that he found a village in such a place. This is exactly what he needs. He decided to rest here. When he heard a noise, he froze worriedly. His eyes widened and showed all the horror and shock that he had experienced. He turned his head back at the sound. Right at this moment, a huge monster, exceeding the size of a human, jumped past. The monster had a great resemblance to a boar. There were a lot of bow arrows sticking out of the creature's body, but that didn't stop it. At one point, the boar-like creature still collapsed to the ground, sliding slightly forward on it. The boar's body curled up, falling onto the creature's back. Dumbfounded, General Goudal watched this with wide eyes, thinking to himself what it was. A girl finally came out of the thick of the trees. She had a bow in her hands. With her other free hand, she reached behind her back, where a bag full of arrows for a bow was hanging. The girl stared fixedly ahead, not noticing the general in front of her. General Guedal, surprised and at the same time questioningly, called the girl by name, calling her Sarah. The girl shuddered and the concentration on her face went away, replaced by surprise. Her eyes widened. The man on the horse was looking in her direction and shouting in surprise, asking why she was alive. The girl turned in his direction and stammered out to Guadala. The girl's hand, which she was reaching behind her back for the arrow, froze in the air. The guy was screaming, both claiming and asking that she couldn't just take off her servant's collar. Is there anyone who can do this? The girl stood silently, looking at him. She was tense, and there was a drop of sweat on her cheek. General Guadala felt as if he had been electrocuted when he recalled some moments from the past. His eyes widened, as if it had dawned on him. One of his memories is of a recent incident when he met Noel on a wagon. And the second is the report. The man's face twisted as he shouted affirmatively that it was Noel, so Gerzas was with him too. The man was struck by his own guess and without Sarah's words. His brows were furrowed and sweat was running down his face. If that's the case, then Noel is coming out of this village. The man was laughing. He would never have thought that he would end up in a place so strongly connected to him. Ahead was that small village with a small number of houses that he had seen earlier. General Goodall's face became like that of a madman. It was as if the eyes were not alive. The man was grinning angrily, which caused wrinkles around his eyes and the bridge of his nose. He shouted that if he took her hostage, he could definitely kill Noel. He grabbed the hilt of his sword with his hand, pulling it out of its scabbard and laughing closed his eyes. In his plans, after that he will use all the resources of this village and make it his fortress to return here sometimes. The girl pointed her bow and arrow at him and screamed that he really thought she would let him do this. She will protect Noel and the village that is so dear to him. Bringing the bow close to the face to aim at the man. The girl had a confident face, in the words addressed to the general. Jumping into the air, the girl released the bowstring, and her arrow flew towards the invader and the enemy in one person. A quick movement appeared at her side, also directed towards the general. Many arrows similar to hers appeared out of nowhere and flew at their target with great speed without stopping. The man, sitting on a horse, swung his sword from the bottom up, deflecting the arrows, which caused a huge explosive wave to appear. The girl looked at what was happening in confusion. A drop of sweat appeared on her face. She was shocked to think to herself that her arrows had been deflected with just one swing. Looking ahead, she opened her mouth in surprise. Sarah finally landed with her feet on the ground. She turned her head to the side, turning her attention to the boar-like monster that she had just killed. The creature lay motionless on its side. Running up to him, the girl grabbed his front hooves and abruptly turned around and lifted his carcass into the air. General Gutal sat motionless on his steed while a huge monster carcass flew straight towards him from the air and approached quite quickly. The boar was spinning in flight while flying from the force of Sarah's throw. With a grin on his lips, the man cut the obstacle flying at him into two parts with one blow of his sword. The man looked extremely relaxed and confident. The monster's blood flew apart from his blow, flying right in front of his face. The man told the girl that it was a vain attempt. When the boar's blood finally stopped blocking his view of what was happening, the general was finally able to turn his attention to the many arrows flying directly towards him. Approaching quickly, they were already too close to him. The general's horse was quickly hit by 2 hits to its body. This caused the animal to stand on its hind hooves and start making loud noises. The general looked at the animal in fright, holding tightly to the animal's reins with his hands and shouting. The man quickly jumped off the wounded animal, landing on the ground on one knee and holding his weight with one hand while the other was busy with the sword. The horse's neck was covered with blood and, closing his eyes, he fell head first. Guadal raised his gaze and shouted with a groan, asking what it was. Was it really the habit of this demonic servant? Sarah, holding her bow, reached with her other hand for the arrows on her back, but shuddered, looked questioningly ahead, and froze in place without moving. Sonia came out of the forest directly to them during the battle, with a basket full of flowers that hung from her bent arm. The girl, not understanding what was happening, was surprised and called out questioningly to Sarah-san. She asked if she was here. Sarah shuddered again and looked fearfully ahead with her mouth and eyes wide open, but she didn't say anything. Turning his head back, the general's face lit up, becoming joyful from what he saw right in front of him. He smiled. In 1 second, the general's sword was at the neck of the unsuspecting Sonia as he stood behind her, pressing the tip of the weapon against her skin. General Goodall was grinning while holding the girl hostage. He held Sonia's shoulder tightly with one hand and pressed his long sword against her throat with the other. The man ordered Sarah to throw the bow if, of course, she did not want her to die. Sonia stuttered with a reddened face, telling Sarah-san not to do this. The girl did not look scared, and it was only because of her stuttering that it was clear that she was tense. As ordered by the general, Sarah opened her palm, and her bow slid out of it, falling to the ground near the girl. Guidal was standing in front of her, in a small clearing surrounded by many trees. General Guidal, smiling after that, said that it was a pity, of course, because he would die anyway. They can wait to meet Noel in hell. Sarah started swearing. She stared ahead worriedly, her mouth hanging open. The girl who was being held hostage sighed with her head down. She was thinking about what would happen if Noel-san came back and saw this. The man continued to squeeze her shoulder and point his weapon at her. The man, smiling, chuckled, and replied to the sad girl that she might not hope. It was clear from his face that he already considered himself the winner of this battle. He told the girls that Noel had been detained by his subordinates. He remembered the moment when all his knights surrounded the carriage driven by the hero, while Guidal himself rode off alone to escape. From somewhere to the side, someone's voice was heard saying that he had found it. A figure came out of the forest. It was a man in a raincoat. His face was half hidden by the hood, and it was not visible who was under it. General Guidal, turning his head to the side, shouted that he was not Noel's colleague. The man both claimed and asked at the same time. The smile had disappeared from his face, and now he looked worried about what was happening. The man in the robe stretched out his hand and opened his palm and began to release magic. Magic circles began to appear in front of his palm. Guidal abruptly removed the sword from Sonia's neck and shoved the girl in the back with his palm. The prisoner screamed and began to fall down. The man with the sword rushed towards the magician, while he stood motionless in place, stretching out his palm in the direction of Guidal attacking him. There was a sound of impact and a splash of light. Guidal pierced the magician with his sword, lifting his body up with his sword. The man with the triumphant face was laughing. He called the magician. He defeated an ordinary rabble. The magician tilted his head down, spitting blood that flowed from his mouth down his chin. The magician was laughing and grinning. He told Guidal that he had done it now. Finally, the hood opened one part of the magician's face, revealing one large eye, from which blood was also flowing. The magician opened her cloak, pushing it in different directions, and showing how a sword sticks out in it. Her body has a spell to remove the seal. She added that with the help of this sealing sword. The general's sword was stuck in the middle of her chest. There were some magical symbols on her body. The girl began to fall backwards to the ground. The surprised General Guidal shouted what it was. Lying on the ground, the magician spoke, pausing between words. "With this, she can change the world," the general shouted at her, asking what she had said. The sword stuck into the girl was covered with a thin black haze that wrapped the weapon in her body like a snake. The magician, lying on the ground, muttered that without any talent, just because he was in the army to capture the Demon King, her place was taken for nothing, even though her life was given to her for the sake of finding magic. There was a smile on her face as she spoke. That's why she should release the power to change this unfair world. The black haze intensified and thickened, covering everything around. The sword was covered with light coming from the girl's wound. She was smiling like a madman. No matter what was happening, she was going to release an evil god who would sweep away all living things in his path. A monster was forming in the air. His body formed gradually and looked like the ribs of a human. Its muzzle was terrifying, with a huge number of fangs in its mouth. Having formed his body in front of the general, there was a huge, black, demon-like monster. It was huge in size and looked intimidating. The man fell backwards, landing on his back. He was shouting, stuttering, and asking what kind of nonsense it was. The monster's huge tongue swept across the guy's face as the demon licked him like a huge dog. The general screamed with his face twisted and his eyes closed. The guy, falling into a stupor, watched as a huge amount of saliva, as if from a fountain, flowed from the mouth of the monster down to the ground. Stuttering, he asked if she knew who he was. "He is the one who will rule this kingdom." The man screamed in denial. "He doesn't want to die. He hasn't become king yet." His face twisted in primal horror. He opened his mouth wide while shouting, which caused wrinkles to appear around his eyes and the bridge of his nose. The monster's huge mouth opened, and it pulled out its long, slimy tongue, wrapping it around General Guidal's body. At one point, the man was inside the mouth of a huge monster, and he slammed it shut while exhaling. The man was no longer visible. He had been swallowed. Sarah and Sonia were sitting on the ground, looking at what was happening in shock. Sarah was kneeling slightly behind the blonde. Sonia pressed her hand to her face, watching in horror. One of the girls asked if it was an evil god. Someone asked the question, "What is going on here at all?" A huge black monster stood up on its hind legs like a man and stretched its front clawed limbs towards the sky, opening its mouth wide. Darkness like tentacles surrounded him from all sides. The sky was covered with darkness, and the white clouds disappeared, turning everything around into darkness. Inside the darkness, a crater appeared, from which light emanated, striking the earth like lightning. In the distance, a girl stood next to her lamb. The wind blew her long, braided hair back. She watched from the side for a huge black crater that blocked the blue sky. The girl was chuckling questioningly. Aqua stuttered and asked what it was. In her opinion, it looked terrible. Her face was contorted with excitement and shock. The girl's lips curled and her eyes opened wide. The high-rise buildings of the nearby city were also covered with darkness above them. The black sky sparkled brightly in one place, striking the ground with lightning. People on the streets raised their heads up looking at the sky, where the black crater above the houses was getting bigger. People asked in shock what had happened. Others commented on what was happening, saying that it was just disgusting. Livestock fell dead to the ground. A man with a horse that was tied with a rope watched in surprise as his animal fell to the ground senseless. Behind her, other animals could be seen lying down, showing no signs of life. Another man was holding vegetables in his hands that had wilted right on the gas. He was surprised. Around him, other plant stems began to wither and die instantly. A black haze was gathering behind the man. At this time, in another place, the building looks like a church from the inside. There were huge windows on the high walls inside the building, from which the blackening sky was perfectly visible. In the middle of the hall there was a pin, with an emblem and spikes. The girl awkwardly scratched her head, talking about her ominous premonition. Her face was slightly furrowed, and a drop of sweat was running down her cheek. A huge curly hairpin was fixed in the girl's hair. There were other people standing around the girl who, unlike her in a white dress, were dressed in floor-length black robes. Putting her hand on her chest, the girl told them that this was a disaster comparable to the Demon King. But after correcting herself, she said that it was even worse. Pointing her finger forward, she urged people around her to immediately gather bishops or high-ranking clergy. And it had to be done immediately. The men in black robes immediately ran forward to carry out the girl's order. The worried girl thought to herself that even if they gathered all the sacred servants, at best they would only be able to keep the disaster in one place. Maybe you should turn to other countries for help. No, they won't make it. The girl screamed, calling to the goddess and asking to hear her prayer. She screamed that the evil god had been resurrected. The figure of the evil god was illuminated by a bright light. The girl begged to borrow her power and perform a divine blessing. A moment later, a vortex of light began to surround the shaped bayonet in the middle of the hall. A goddess with a halo over her head appeared floating in the air right in front of the girl. The summoner girl stood below, looking at the deity. The goddess, spreading her arms apart, answered the girl's pleas, saying that her power was not needed here. The goddess did not move over her while her dress was developing in different directions. The girl, not understanding what was happening, was trying to say something else to the woman in front of her. The goddess, with a glowing halo on her head, smiled, telling the girl the news that a helping hand had already been extended to the enemy. The girl froze, looking at her with unreadable eyes. She was obviously surprised by this news. The sky continued to thicken into a black haze. In the midst of all this chaos, standing on his hind legs was an evil god whose body had become human-like. The light from the crater illuminated him with a bright glow as he opened his mouth and looked up. The girls were sitting next to each other downstairs. Sarah thought that it was getting bigger and bigger. She wondered if the evil god had absorbed all the energy in the area. She was watching a huge demonic monster. She knows it's worth running, but she can't move. Her hair was lifted up by the strong wind in the epicenter of the disaster. Next to her, Sonia clenched her fists against her chest and closed her eyes in fear as the wind blew in her direction, blowing her blonde hair. Sarah thought that at least she needed to help Sonia, because she was a good match for Noelle. The elf grabbed the girl next to her, wrapping her arms around her head and pressing her face to her shoulder, protecting her. She looked ahead anxiously. A man appeared next to the girls. He apologized to them for making X wait. With a gasp of surprise, the elf began to rise from the ground, continuing to hold the frightened Sonia. It turned out that none other than Noelle came to help. He clutched a huge sword in his hands and confidently looked forward without a shadow of fear, it seems, not even worrying about what was happening in front of him. The elf stared straight ahead. Her neat mouth opened in surprise, and her eyes were fixed on the hero. The monster's mouth opened so wide that it was frightening. You could see small but very sharp teeth, like a shark's. A long tongue stuck out as the monster roared into the sky. His eyes glowed like small explosions. Waving his hands quickly, as if striking many blows at the same time, the evil god tilted his head forward, stopping looking up. After a moment, it was as if an explosion had occurred in the evil god's body. Pieces of the monster began to fly in different directions. Only the tail and legs remained intact. In just one swing of the sword, Noel cut down the evil god. The jaw and eye flew behind the hero, as well as other parts of the body. Noel landed on one knee on the ground with his sword in his hand. The guy looked relaxed, as if he wasn't straining at all. The sky finally became clear again. There were white fluffy clouds on it as usual, instead of a thick black haze that covered all the light. On the field, next to the sheep, stood a confused Aqua, clutching her head with her hands. The girl looked very confused. They asked her if she was okay. The girl, not having heard, asked again. Aqua turned around and asked in confusion why Noel was here, and even Sarah and Sonia. The hero, smiling, put one hand on his belt and looked at Aqua. The other two girls stood behind the guy from different sides and smiled the same way. Aqua leaned her hand on her chin and looked ahead questioningly. She told the guys that she had a strange feeling, but Noel smiled broadly, closing his eyes, and said that they were all safe. At this time in the castle during the attack, the huge and tall castle of the royal family, columns of dust or smoke were visible around him. One of the knights, whose leg was completely covered with metal armor, ran forward. Gurzus, clenching his teeth, swung his sword and wounded the soldier in front, whose armor could not withstand the pressure of the weapon and did not save the soldier. Behind him, one of the helmeted knights struck back at Gurzus, hitting him in the shoulder. Gurzus turned to General Gushar and shouted at him to go ahead, and he would detain them here. The general instantly agreed with him, while they exchanged glances with each other. The man got inside the palace and opened the huge doors in front of him by pushing them with his hands, and knights in armor followed him behind. He found himself in a brightly lit office. Opposite him, there were two other men in the hall. One of them, clutching his palm, shouted at the general about how reckless he was. He asked if he even knows what kind of place it is. The second man was silent, sitting on a chair. General Gushar, looking ahead, replied that if the right person sat on the throne, they would have no reason to rebel. Unfortunately, things are different. The man and his soldiers stood in place, their gazes directed forward. Finally, he told the man on the throne that this was the end and called him Your Majesty. The man to whom these words were dedicated clenched his teeth. His face darkened, because he was clearly not happy with the current situation. The general went out onto the balcony of the castle and raised his fist in the air, addressing the people outside the building. He was shouting that it was finally over. People shouted back about the glory of Lebanon. Raising their hands up, the people from below wished health and long life to General Gushar and wished prosperity to Lavania. A large crowd of people gathered below at the gates of the royal castle, rejoicing at their victory. Sarah and Noel walked forward along the corridor of the palace. There were no windows in the wall to the side of them. Instead, there were only large arches allowing sunlight to illuminate the corridors of the building. Sarah, looking ahead, asked Noel what was going on about the legal case. The guy explained that when the royal family was overthrown, their sins were made public all over the world. They needed to convince the people of their country and other states. He turned slightly to the side in the direction of the girl who was walking behind, and added that this was why they would have to be officially charged in court. Sarah, looking at the hero, asked him if the king would give up so easily. The guy thought about it, and grabbing his chin with his fingers, answered the girl's question that he did not know this. Straightening up and walking next to each other now, Sarah turned her head to Noel and, remembering, clarified what was going on with the saint's punishment. The guy gasped, remembering about Stella, a snow-white, clean corridor with paintings hanging on the walls. At the end of it was a wide, closed door. The girl held on with her hands and pulled on the metal bars by the window in the wall. She screamed about how it came to this. Victory parade in honor of the victory over the Demon King, their wedding ceremony with Prince Cain. Didn't everyone wish her happiness? Behind Saint Stella, the doors to the room opened, while she held on to the bars looking out the window. The man standing at the entrance to her room asked if she was listening to other people's opinions. The girl froze into silence. There was a girl in the room, who was summoning the goddess and Noel. Putting her hand on her waist, the girl said that the speeches she heard were not congratulations, but a cry of despair. Noel was standing by her side, smiling with the corners of his lips. Saint Stella turned in their direction and cried out in surprise, calling out to the Holy Queen and Noel. She was surprised that the guy was alive. Sitting on the bed, she looked at them in shock. The girl, without any emotion on her face, informed the girls that they had come to announce her verdict. Stella froze and stuttered and asked again about the verdict. Her face was a mask of horror and fear. She froze, staring at them with wide eyes as her face paled. She waved her hands and indignantly asked why. As she said, she defeated the Demon King. She rudely called out to Noel, ordering him to confirm this fact. The guy was looking down at her. She was asked if it wasn't just the hero who did it. They had thrown all their responsibilities on his shoulders and were standing in the middle of the way. In the past, in the memory, Stella, Guadal, and Aina were in the center of the magic circle, and the hero stood outside it. The girl honestly admitted that it was Goodall's order. The Holy Queen asked her with a grin if that was the case. Then she asked about complicity in the crime of forgery of a real hero. Surely this is also Goodall's order, isn't it? Stella was sitting on the bed, clasping her hands on her legs. She looked questioningly at the saint as she began to approach her. The girl, coming closer to her and extending her hand forward in front of Stella, opened her palm, close to her forehead. She pronounced a verdict that from now on it would be a grave sin for her to call herself a saint. The saint looked at her open palm in fright. The Holy Queen touched the black mark on the girl's forehead with her fingers, and she began to glow with a bright light connecting from Stella's skin like a sticker. The girl clutched her head with her hands with a disbelieving face. She gasped in denial. She said that there was no such thing as the power of the Holy One, they were hers. The girl's hands were shaking, and her face showed a grimace of horror and denial of what was happening. The Holy Queen, turning sideways to the floor, parried her words by replying that they had never been hers. She borrowed them from the goddess to help the hero. The woman's face was angry. These words clearly unnerved her. Stella seemed to panic. She was trembling all over, holding her hair with her hands and hanging her head down with a blank look. The queen added to the previous words that now she will pay for her sin and conspiracy against the goddess in the monastery of the capital, forever. Having managed to remove the panic and quell the trembling, the girl replied that she did not. She jerked sharply towards the guy, calling out to Noel several times. She said that now everyone will know that he is the hero of the kingdom, right? The girl's face was all red and tears were streaming down her cheeks, trickling down to her chin. Stuttering, she said that she was carrying a child under her heart and would not be able to withstand such a life. She was clenching the fabric of her cape in her fist against her nerves. Throwing her head back, she closed her eyes and sobbed bitterly, begging Noel to save her. The girl's despair was strong. The guy, not reacting to her tears with a calm face, said that if she sincerely wanted to change, then let her return to their hometown at any time. Rubbing his nose with his hand, the guy added that the village was still under construction. It's pretty shabby and there aren't many residents in it, but if she wants to start over, he thinks it's a good option for her. The girl, her eyes wide open, blushed all over. She screamed that no, she didn't want it. There is nothing in this village. Covering her ears with her hands and closing her eyes, she began to sob bitterly again. She screamed that if she settled in such a remote place, she would become a hillbilly. She won't be able to stand it. Stella was clearly unrepentant about what she had done. The Holy Queen called Stella, and she turned her head in her direction with an excited face. The girl said she was going to have a baby. She will bring him up and learn to be a human being again. The hero stood nearby and was silent. The queen's face was annoyed when she said that everything she had said earlier was the punishment she had given her. The girl bent her whole body forward in an atmosphere of dejection. She slightly removed her palms from her shocked face and stared into the void. She remembered the guy and asked about the prince. She asked what would happen to Prince Cain. She was told that he would work in the mine where all the perpetrators were sent. From now on, the chance that they will meet again is 0. Sobbing bitterly, the girl raised her head and repeated the queen's words that he was guilty, currently in the corridor of the castle. Sarah said that means that's what happened. It didn't end well for Stella. The sun's rays fell on the walls of a long corridor. Sarah smiled, looking at Noel. She found advantages in this, because in the monastery she will be able to safely take care of her child without worries and worries. The main character somehow smiled sadly, sighing, and said that it was so. They moved further forward, and the girl, putting her hand on his back, patted him lightly with her palm as support.